At my daughter's 7th birthday party, I watched my own mother-in-law slip a heavy dose of white powder into my margarita. So instead of confronting her, I smiled, picked up the glass, and handed it directly to her precious golden child daughter. What happened next tore their entire world apart. My name is Natalie, and I am 34 years old. I spent the last 5 years letting my husband's family believe I was nothing but a broke failed startup founder who leeched off their son. What they did not know was that my healthcare cybersecurity firm was actually worth millions. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart toxic in-laws. The afternoon sun was beating down on the patio of our suburban home. It was my daughter Lily's 7th birthday, and the backyard was swarming with 50 of my husband Ryan's affluent judgmental relatives. I was standing near the sliding glass doors wearing a simple sundress, holding a tray of appetizers. That was when my mother-in-law, Patricia, cornered me. Patricia was 62, draped in expensive linen, with eyes that always looked at me like I was something she had stepped on. She leaned in close, her designer perfume suffocating me, and lowered her voice to a vicious hiss. "You are just a leech, Natalie," she whispered, grabbing my wrist tightly enough to leave a mark. "A pathetic leech sucking the life out of my son. Look at you. You cannot even afford a decent dress for your own child's party. Ryan works day and night to pay for this house, and you do nothing but tinker with that imaginary computer business of yours in the basement. Today will be the last day you humiliate this family." I simply looked down and pulled my arm away, playing the meek, intimidated wife she expected me to be. "I am doing my best, Patricia," I said softly. "Your best is garbage," she spat back. "Enjoy the party. It is your last one in this zip code." She turned on her heel and walked over to the outdoor bar station. I stayed by the sliding glass door, taking a deep breath to steady my racing heart. I was used to Patricia's venom, but her confidence today felt heavily calculated. I turned slightly, pretending to watch Lily jump in the bounce house, but my eyes caught the reflection in the dark tinted glass of the sliding door. The reflection gave me a perfect view of the bar behind me. I watched Patricia glance around to make sure no one was looking. My husband Ryan was standing only a few feet away from her, deliberately positioning his broad shoulders to block the view of the other guests. He was helping her hide whatever she was doing. Through the dark glass, I saw Patricia reach into her clutch, pull out a small paper packet, and empty a heavy dose of white powder into the margarita glass sitting on the counter. The glass she knew the bartender had just poured specifically for me. She stirred it quickly with a straw, tossed the empty packet into a trash can, and walked away with a satisfied smirk. Ryan looked over his shoulder, caught his mother's eye, and gave her a subtle nod. My own husband was helping his mother drug me at our 7-year-old daughter's birthday party. My mind raced, connecting the dots with chilling clarity. Ryan had been threatening to file for sole custody of Lily for weeks, claiming I was mentally unstable. Family courts favor joint custody, unless one parent is proven unfit. They needed an incident. They needed me to lose my mind or collapse in front of 50 wealthy witnesses. If I drank whatever chemical they just slipped into my glass, I would become the hysterical, unhinged mother they needed me to be. The sheer malice of it took my breath away. Tampering with a drink is a felony offense. But I did not panic. I did not scream or run to the police. Years of working in corporate cybersecurity had taught me one fundamental rule. When you spot a trap, you do not disarm it. Let the attacker walk right into it. I plastered a warm smile on my face and turned away from the glass. I walked confidently over to the outdoor bar. I picked up the glass, feeling the cold condensation against my palm. Just then, my sister-in-law, Brittany, strutted over in her $3,000 Gucci dress, demanding a drink, unaware of the poison her mother dropped into the tequila. It was time to play my part in their game. Brittany marched across the manicured lawn, her stiletto heels sinking slightly into the grass. She was 32 and wore a bright yellow silk Gucci dress that cost more than my first car. Her blonde hair was perfectly blown out and her face carried the same permanent sneer her mother had perfected over the decades. Brittany had always treated me like an unpaid intern in the family business of pleasing Ryan. She stopped in front of me, looking me up and down with obvious disgust. "Is that dress from Target?" she asked loudly enough for the neighbors to hear. "I swear, Natalie, you have absolutely no pride. Ryan brings home the bacon, and you cannot even bother to look presentable for your own daughter's party. You look like you just rolled out of bed to serve us appetizers." I kept my expression perfectly neutral. The glass in my hand felt heavy. The white powder Patricia had stirred into the icy liquid was completely dissolved, leaving no trace of the felony that had just occurred. I looked at Brittany, then glanced across the yard. Patricia was watching us like a hawk, waiting for me to take the first sip. Ryan was standing next to her, checking his expensive watch, probably timing my impending mental breakdown. "I'm just trying to make sure everyone is having a good time, Brittany," I said, keeping my voice soft and accommodating. "It is a warm day. You look beautiful, though. That yellow really stands out." She scoffed, flipping her hair over her shoulder. "Of course it does. It is imported silk. Not that you would know what that feels like." She let out an exasperated sigh and waved her hand dramatically in front of her face. "It is sweltering out here. Did you cheap out on the catering, too? The food is barely edible and I am dying of thirst. What is that you are holding?" She pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at the spiked margarita in my right hand. "Oh, this," I asked, holding the glass up slightly. The condensation dripped onto my fingers. "It is just a margarita. The bartender just made it. But honestly, I think he poured it a little too strong. You know how Ryan likes to hire those budget bartenders to save a few dollars?" I knew exactly how to play Brittany. If I offered it to her, she would reject it just to spite me. But if I suggested it was not good enough for her or that it was too strong, she would take it just to prove a point. She was as predictable as her mother. "Give it here," she demanded, reaching out. "I need something to take the edge off. Being around this much tacky patio furniture is giving me a migraine." I hesitated, pretending to be protective of my drink. "Are you sure?" I asked, taking a small step back. "I have not even tasted it yet. I can go get you a fresh one. It will only take a second." "Do not be ridiculous, Natalie," she snapped, snatching the cold glass right out of my hand. Her fingers brushed mine and I felt a sharp jolt of adrenaline. "You move slower than a turtle and I am thirsty now. Besides, you do not need the calories." I stood completely still and watched as she lifted the rim to her lips. Across the lawn, Patricia's eyes widened in absolute horror. I saw her take a step forward, her mouth dropping open, but she was too far away and the music was playing too loudly for her to shout. Ryan was staring at his phone, completely oblivious to the disastrous pivot their master plan had just taken. Brittany tilted her head back and took a massive gulp. She swallowed hard, wincing slightly at the burn of the tequila. Then, because she always had to show off, she took another huge swallow, draining more than half of the liquid in seconds. She lowered the glass and wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of pink lipstick on the rim. "See," she said, shoving the half-empty glass back into my hands. "It is completely watered down. You really do not know how to throw a decent party. Next year, let my mother handle the planning so Lily does not have to suffer through another embarrassing backyard barbecue." I took the glass back, holding it carefully by the stem. "You are probably right, Brittany," I said. A cold, serene smile spread across my face. "I am sure next year will be very, very different." Just then, Jamal walked over to us. He was 35, a highly successful corporate lawyer, and the only person in this family who actually earned his own money. He was an African-American man with a sharp, commanding presence, but right now he just looked exhausted. He loosened his silk tie and looked at his wife with mild annoyance. "Brittany, why are you drinking tequila at 2 in the afternoon?" Jamal asked, his deep voice cutting through the pop music blaring from the outdoor speakers. "We have to be at the country club dinner in 4 hours. You promised you would pace yourself today." "Oh, relax, Jamal," she snapped, turning to face him. "I am just having a sip of Natalie's pathetic excuse for a cocktail. I feel completely fine." But she did not look fine. As she spoke, a sudden flush of deep red crept up her neck. A bead of sweat formed on her forehead. The heavy dose of sedatives and laxatives was hitting her empty stomach with the force of a freight train. Brittany blinked rapidly, trying to focus her eyes on Jamal. She opened her mouth to snap at him again, but the words came out as a thick, unintelligible slur. "I am fine," she tried to say, but it sounded like a heavy, wet groan. The muscles in her face went completely slack. The crystal margarita glass slipped from her fingers. It hit the stone patio with a sharp crash, shattering into dozens of glittering pieces. The loud noise caused the conversations around us to instantly stop. The upbeat pop music playing over the outdoor speakers suddenly felt entirely out of place. 50 wealthy guests turned their heads toward the patio. Jamal stepped forward instinctively, grabbing his wife's arm to steady her. "Brittany." "What is wrong?" he asked, his voice losing its mild annoyance and shifting into genuine deep concern. "Are you dizzy?" She did not answer. The cocktail of heavy sedatives and industrial-strength laxatives my mother-in-law had intended for me was coursing through Brittany's veins. Because she had not eaten anything all day, just to fit into her expensive silk dress, the chemicals absorbed into her bloodstream at an alarming rapid rate. Her knees buckled underneath her. Jamal caught her by the waist, holding her upright, but she was completely dead weight in his arms. Then the ultimate humiliation struck. Patricia had designed this specific chemical dose to completely destroy my dignity in front of the entire neighborhood. She wanted me to lose bodily control. She wanted Ryan to have a video of me acting like a deranged addict. Instead, it was her precious golden child who suffered the horrific consequence. A terrible smell suddenly pierced the warm afternoon air. A dark brown stain began to spread rapidly down the back of Brittany's bright yellow silk dress. The laxatives had hit her system with violent force. She had completely soiled herself right in the middle of the patio in front of everyone she wanted to impress. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Several of Ryan's snobby relatives actually took a step back, covering their mouths in shock and utter disgust. Women in expensive summer dresses turned their faces away, whispering frantically to their husbands. Brittany was awake enough to realize what was happening, but the heavy sedatives had completely paralyzed her motor functions. Tears of absolute mortification streamed down her face, ruining her perfect, expensive makeup. She let out a pathetic whimpering sound, unable to move or hide. "No," Jamal muttered under his breath, trying desperately to shield her body from the staring crowd. "Someone bring a towel. Right now. Get back. Everyone. Give her some space." But it was too late. The humiliation was absolute and irreversible. And the physical crisis was only just beginning. The massive dose of sedatives was far too much for her elevated heart rate to handle. Brittany's eyes rolled to the back of her head, showing only the whites. Her body went completely rigid, stiffening like a board, and then she began to shake violently. She was collapsing into severe convulsions. Jamal lowered her carefully to the ground to keep her from hitting her head on the hard stone pavers. He dropped to his knees, ignoring the fact that his expensive tailored suit was soaking up the spilled drink and the humiliating mess. He grabbed his phone from his pocket with shaking hands. "Someone call 911, he screamed at the top of his lungs. "She is having a seizure. Call an ambulance right now." Across the lawn, Patricia finally broke out of her paralyzed state of shock. She let out a blood-curdling scream that echoed off the sides of the house and silenced the murmuring crowd. "No," she shrieked, dropping her designer clutch and sprinting across the grass. "Not my baby. Get away from her." She threw herself onto the patio, pushing Jamal aside and pulling Brittany's convulsing head into her lap. Patricia did not care about the awful smell or the mess ruining her linen clothes. She was hyperventilating, her eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. She knew exactly what was happening. She knew exactly what chemicals were tearing through her daughter's body, and she knew that the massive dose was meant for me. Ryan ran over, looking completely bewildered and helpless. "Mom, what is happening?" he yelled, grabbing his own hair in panic. "Did she have a stroke? Why is she shaking like that?" He looked up at me, his eyes darting frantically, searching for an explanation. He fully expected me to be the one on the ground foaming at the mouth. I stood there completely still, looking down at the absolute chaos unfolding at my feet. I did not smile, But I did not offer to help them either. I simply folded my arms and watched them panic. What did she drink? Patricia screamed, looking wildly at the broken glass on the patio and then glaring up at me. Her face was twisted in an ugly, desperate mask of guilt and fury. What did you give her, Natalie? What was in that glass? Jamal was already on the phone with the emergency dispatcher, shouting our address and describing the violent convulsions. He paused just long enough to look at me, then glared at Patricia. "What are you talking about, Patricia?" he yelled over the noise of the frantic crowd. She just took a sip of a margarita. "That does not cause seizures." The distant sound of sirens began to wail down our quiet suburban street, growing louder by the second. The perfect birthday party had turned into an absolute nightmare. The guests were backing away toward the gates, pointing at the ruined dress, and whispering about secret drug addictions. Patricia was sobbing hysterically, clutching her convulsing daughter, while Ryan stood frozen, unable to comprehend how their perfect evil plan had backfired so spectacularly. I remained perfectly silent, knowing that the real battle was only just beginning. The flashing red lights of the ambulance faded into the harsh fluorescent glare of the emergency room waiting area. The ride behind the paramedics had been a blur of screeching tires and frantic medical jargon. Now the heavy silence of the hospital was suffocating. Jamal paced the length of the linoleum floor, his dress shoes squeaking sharply with every frantic turn. He had ridden in the back of the ambulance with Brittany, and his crisp white dress shirt was still terribly stained with her vomit and the dirt from our patio. He was a man who commanded high-stakes corporate boardrooms and tore apart ironclad contracts for a living, but right now he looked utterly helpless and completely unhinged. "Why is nobody telling me anything?" Jamal demanded, stopping to glare at the heavy double doors leading to the trauma bay. He ran a shaking hand over his face. "She was perfectly fine this morning." A healthy 32-year-old woman does not just randomly collapse into a grand mal seizure in the middle of a backyard barbecue. Someone needs to give me an answer right now. I sat rigid on a hard plastic chair in the far corner of the waiting room. My husband Ryan was sitting directly across from me, but he had not looked at my face once since we arrived at the hospital. He had not asked if I was okay. He had not even asked about our 7-year-old daughter Lily, who was currently safe next door at my neighbor's house, oblivious to the disaster. Instead, all of his attention was focused entirely on his mother. Patricia was draped across a row of waiting room chairs, clutching a crumpled tissue and putting on the theatrical performance of a lifetime. She wailed loudly, her voice deliberately echoing down the sterile hallway to ensure every passing nurse and security guard could hear her. My poor baby girl Patricia sobbed, burying her face in Ryan's shoulder. What did she ingest? It was that drink. I know it was that drink. She suddenly sat upright and pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at me. Her eyes were red and puffy, but I could see the cold, calculated malice hiding just beneath the surface. It was Natalie, she announced, her voice carrying perfectly across the quiet room. Natalie was the one holding the glass. She was the one who handed it to Brittany. Jamal stopped pacing immediately. He turned slowly, his broad shoulders tensing as he looked at me. The sheer exhaustion in his eyes was instantly replaced by a sharp, analytical glare. "What are you saying, Patricia?" he asked, his voice dropping an octave dangerously low. Patricia started shaking her head aggressively, playing the role of the traumatized, terrified mother to absolute perfection. "I saw it, Jamal. I saw Natalie hovering over the bar station all afternoon. She hates us. She has always hated our family because we see right through her. She was jealous of Brittany's beautiful dress and Brittany's perfect life. She handed her that glass intentionally. Ryan, you have to tell them. Tell him how unstable your wife has been lately." Ryan finally looked at me, and the deep betrayal in his eyes was so well practiced it almost looked genuine. "Mom, please," he muttered, rubbing his jaw and looking away, playing the part of the torn, devastated husband. "Do not say that. Natalie would not do something like this. She has been struggling, yes. She has been having some severe mental health issues and acting very erratic around the house lately, but she would not intentionally poison my sister." The pivot they were making was breathtakingly smooth. Since I did not drink the poison, and give them the crazy wife narrative they originally needed for their custody battle, they were instantly shifting the script on the fly. Now I was no longer just an unfit mother. I was the jealous, unhinged woman who deliberately poisoned her wealthy sister-in-law. They were actively laying the groundwork to have me arrested. Once I was placed in handcuffs, Ryan would file an emergency order for sole custody of Lily and claim all our marital assets while I rotted in a jail cell. Jamal walked slowly over to where I was sitting. He crossed his arms, towering over me. His sharp features were set in stone, his ruthless lawyer instincts fully activated. "Natalie," he said, his tone entirely stripped of any familial warmth. "Did you pour that drink?" I looked up at him, keeping my breathing slow and perfectly even. "I did not pour the drink, Jamal," I said quietly. "The bartender poured it." Brittany came over to me, complained that the party was cheap, and snatched the glass directly out of my hand. I never even took a sip. "Liar!" Patricia shrieked, jumping up from her chair and pointing at me again. "She is lying, Jamal. I saw her holding it. Who knows what she slipped into it? She has been trying to destroy this family since the day she married Ryan. You have to call the police. You have to tell them to arrest her right now before she tries to hurt someone else." The heavy double doors of the trauma bay slid open before Jamal could respond. A tall doctor in dark blue scrubs stepped out holding a digital tablet. The frantic chatter in the room instantly died. Patricia stopped her theatrical crying mid-sob. Ryan stood up straight. Jamal practically sprinted across the room to reach the doctor. "Is she all right?" Jamal demanded, his voice tight, with an anxiety that I knew was completely genuine. "Tell me my wife is going to be okay." The doctor looked down at his tablet, then back up at Jamal, with a grim expression. "We have managed to stabilize her heart rate, and she is currently resting," he said, his voice projecting a professional but grave tone. "The convulsions have stopped, but we had to put her on a heavy IV drip to replenish the fluids she lost so violently. The trauma to her system was extensive. She will be in the intensive care unit overnight for close observation." "Thank God," Ryan muttered, sinking back into his chair and running a trembling hand through his hair, playing the relieved brother beautifully. "But we have a much bigger problem." The doctor continued, shifting his gaze to encompass the entire group. Two uniformed police officers stepped out from the swinging double doors directly behind him. Their sudden presence immediately shifted the atmosphere in the waiting room from a tense medical emergency to an active criminal investigation. Patricia stiffened her posture, her eyes darting nervously toward the officers before locking back onto me with renewed venom. "When a patient comes in with unexplained violent seizures, we immediately run a full toxicology screen," the doctor explained, holding up the glowing tablet. "The results just came back from the lab on a rush order. Your wife did not suffer a random medical event or simple food poisoning. She ingested a massive, highly concentrated dose of a Schedule 4 sedative, specifically a type of powerful tranquilizer usually prescribed for severe panic disorders." Jamal stared at the doctor in absolute disbelief, shaking his head. "A tranquilizer," he echoed, his legal mind struggling to process the medical terms. "Brittany does not take tranquilizers. She only takes organic vitamins and supplements." "There has to be a mistake with the lab work." "There is no mistake, Mr. Davis," the doctor replied firmly, scrolling down on his screen. "And it was not just a sedative. It was mixed with an industrial-strength laxative. The combination of these two harsh chemicals hitting her empty stomach simultaneously caused her central nervous system to go into severe shock. This was a deliberate pharmaceutical concoction. Someone intentionally gave this dangerous mixture to her." One of the police officers, a burly man with a silver badge gleaming against his dark uniform, stepped forward holding a small black notepad. "State law is very clear on this matter, folks," the officer said, his voice deep and authoritative, ringing through the quiet room. "Tampering with food or beverages to intentionally cause bodily harm is a serious felony offense. We are now officially investigating this incident as a criminal act. We need to know exactly what your wife ate or drank before the collapse." This was the precise moment Patricia had been waiting for. This was the exact cue for her grand rehearsed performance. She lunged forward, her manicured hands trembling violently as she pointed her index finger straight at my face. It was her, Patricia shrieked, her voice echoing off the sterile walls of the hospital waiting area. I saw it with my own two eyes. She handed Brittany a margarita just seconds before my daughter collapsed in agony. "Ma'am, please lower your voice and calm down," the officer said, holding up a hand to de-escalate the situation. "I will not calm down." Patricia screamed, tears streaming down her wrinkled cheeks with practiced theatrical perfection. "She has been trying to destroy this family for years. She hates us. She hates my son. She is a psychotic, jealous woman who wanted to humiliate my beautiful daughter." I watched her stand over the bar all afternoon guarding the drinks. I watched her hand that specific poisoned glass to Brittany. She tried to kill my baby. Arrest her. Arrest her right now before she leaves. Ryan immediately moved to his mother, wrapping his arms around her shoulders and staring at me with a look of manufactured horror. "Officer, you have to understand," he said, his voice shaking, perfectly playing the role of the distressed protective husband. "My wife, Natalie, has not been well. She has been incredibly paranoid lately, talking to herself, locking herself in the basement. I wanted to get her psychiatric help, but I never thought she was capable of doing something this evil to my own sister. Please, you have to take her into custody before she hurts anyone else." The officers turned their attention entirely to me. Their hands rested instinctively on their utility belts, ready for a confrontation. The entire waiting room seemed to hold its collective breath. Jamal was looking at me. His dark eyes narrowed his sharp corporate lawyer mind, processing the sheer gravity of the accusations being hurled in my direction. He knew the law better than anyone in that room, and he knew that eyewitness testimony from a mother combined with a husband, confirming his wife's supposed mental instability, was usually more than enough for an immediate arrest. But I did not give them the satisfying reaction they desperately wanted. I did not cry. I did not scream back at Patricia or beg Ryan to tell the truth. I simply sat in my hard plastic chair, my hands folded neatly in my lap, meeting the lead officer's gaze with absolute, unblinking calm. The second officer, a woman with a sharp, no-nonsense expression, walked deliberately over to my corner. "Ma'am," she said sternly, pulling out a pair of handcuffs, "I am going to need you to stand up and come with us to a private room. We have a lot of questions and you need to answer them right now." I stood up without hesitation, smoothing down my sundress. "I am perfectly willing to answer any questions, officer," I said, my voice steady and devoid of panic. "Lead the way." The officers exchanged a brief look. Usually guilty people cry or act defensively. I did none of those things. The male officer gestured toward a consultation room. I walked ahead, posture straight. Just as the door was about to close, a large hand pushed it open. Jamal stepped into the sterile room, his imposing frame taking up space. "I have a right to be here," he stated, flashing a credential wallet. "I am the victim's husband and a licensed attorney. I want to hear what this woman has to say." The female officer frowned, but nodded. "You need to keep quiet, counselor," she warned. "This is our interview." Jamal did not look at her. His furious gaze was locked on me. "You are going to prison, Natalie," he hissed, his voice vibrating with rage. "Attempted murder is a felony. You will lose your daughter, your freedom, and I will personally make sure you never see the outside of a jail cell. You tried to kill my wife because you are a miserable, broke failure." I let his insult wash over me. Jamal was a brilliant lawyer operating purely on emotion and the lies my mother-in-law fed him. I felt a brief flicker of pity. He had no idea his own wife's family orchestrated this nightmare and treated him like a foolish pawn in their sick, twisted game. "Mr. Davis, step back," the male officer ordered, pulling out a chair. I sat down, folding my hands on the table. "Let us start from the beginning," the female officer said. "Your mother-in-law stated she saw you guarding the drinks and handing a specific glass to the victim. Did you put anything in that margarita?" "No, I absolutely did not," I answered. "Did you pour the drink?" the female officer pressed. "No," I replied. "We hired a bartender. He poured the drink and set it on the bar. I picked it up. Brittany approached, insulted my clothing, and took the glass from my hand. I never drank from it, and I never added anything to it." The male officer leaned forward. "So you are saying your mother-in-law is lying? Why would she make up a story about seeing you tamper with the drink?" This was the critical moment. My heart beat steadily in my chest. If I told them the truth right now, if I said I saw Patricia pour the powder, they would simply ask her. Patricia would deny it. She would say I was framing her. It would be my word against hers, and Ryan would back her up. I needed Patricia to officially commit her lies to a sworn police statement. I needed her to perjure herself permanently. I needed them locked into a story they could not escape. I am saying you should take a formal recorded statement from my mother-in-law and my husband, I said with precision. If Patricia claims she saw me do something, get her exact testimony on the official record. Ask Ryan exactly what he saw too. Jamal let out a bitter laugh. Oh, we will get it on the record, he sneered. We will get sworn affidavits from everyone at that party who saw you acting like a lunatic. The female officer narrowed her eyes. You are remarkably calm for a woman whose sister-in-law is currently in the intensive care unit. Most people would be frantic, weeping, or begging for forgiveness. You just sit there like a stone. Panicking will not help anyone find the truth, officer, I replied softly. I strongly suggest you collect all physical evidence from the patio. The broken glass, the trash cans near the bar, everything. By requesting they search the trash, I was ensuring the evidence would be preserved before Ryan could dispose of it. If the police found the empty packet, it would carry Patricia's fingerprints, not mine. We will process the scene, the male officer said, closing his notepad. Since the glass is shattered and we have conflicting witness statements, we are not making an immediate arrest. However, you are a person of interest in a major felony investigation. Do not leave the city. I have no intention of leaving, I said, standing up smoothly. Are we done here? Jamal shoved himself off the doorframe, his face inches from mine. He pointed a long, threatening finger directly at my chest. This is not over, Natalie, he growled. Enjoy your last few days of freedom. I looked right into Jamal's dark, furious eyes and offered a polite nod. I will see you very soon, Jamal, I said. I turned and walked out of the consultation room, leaving Jamal to simmer in his own blind rage. The police did not stop me. As I walked down the sterile hospital corridor, I knew exactly why they had let me go. The margarita glass had shattered on the stone patio, destroying the most direct piece of physical evidence. My fingerprints were nowhere near the empty powder packet Patricia had tossed into the trash. Right now, the entire situation was nothing more than a he said, she said scenario. The police needed time to build a solid case. They thought they were investigating me, but they were actually gathering the very evidence that would soon bury my husband and his mother. I stepped out into the cool evening air and requested an Uber. The ride back to our suburban neighborhood was silent. I watched the streetlights pass by through the window, my mind working with cold precision. My only immediate concern was my daughter Lily. I knew she had been safely escorted to our next-door neighbor's house when the ambulance arrived, but I needed to get her back. The Uber pulled up to the curb in front of our house. The deflated bounce house was a sad reminder of the party that had turned into a crime scene. I thanked the driver and walked up the driveway. The house was completely dark except for the porch light. I stepped up to the front door and pressed my thumb against the biometric smart lock. Instead of the familiar green chime, a harsh red light flashed across the keypad. Access denied. I entered my backup numerical PIN. Red light again. Access denied. Before I could knock, the heavy wooden door swung open. Ryan stood in the doorway, blocking the entrance. He had changed out of his party clothes and wore comfortable sweatpants. His posture was completely different now. The faux panic he had displayed at the hospital was gone. In its place was a smug, arrogant smirk. He did not say a word at first. He simply reached behind the door, grabbed my gray suitcase by the handle, and forcefully kicked it out onto the porch. The suitcase tumbled down the concrete steps, landing in the decorative bushes. "You are not coming inside, Natalie," he said, his voice dripping with fake authority. "You are never stepping foot in this house again." I stood on the porch looking up at the man I had spent the last 8 years with. "Where is Lily?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level. "Lily is fast asleep in her room, where she is safe from her dangerously unstable mother," he sneered. "I picked her up from the neighbors an hour ago. Do not even think about trying to see her. If you take one step closer to this door, I will call the police and tell them you are trespassing and acting violent. Given the stunt you pulled today, they will have a patrol car here in 2 minutes to drag you away in handcuffs." He crossed his arms, looking incredibly pleased with himself. He really thought he had orchestrated the perfect coup. "I am filing for divorce first thing tomorrow morning, Natalie, and I am filing for emergency sole custody. I have 50 witnesses who saw you guarding that poison drink, and a mother who will testify she saw you hand it to Brittany. No family court judge is going to let a psychotic attempted murderer near a child." I looked at my suitcase lying in the dirt. "You changed the locks on the house we bought together," I stated. "I changed the locks on my house," he corrected me with a nasty laugh. "The house my paycheck pays for. You contributed nothing to this marriage but your ridiculous failed tech startup. You are a leech, Natalie. Mom was right about you from day one. You are leaving this marriage with absolutely nothing. No house, no money, and no daughter. You are going straight to prison." Ryan thought his words would break me. He expected me to fall to my knees begging for a second chance. He wanted to see me unravel so he could record it on his phone. Instead, I simply nodded. I walked down the concrete steps and calmly picked up my suitcase from the bushes. "I will be hearing from your lawyer then, Ryan," I said, turning my back on him without a single tear. "You will hear from the police first," he shouted after me. "Have a nice life on the streets." The heavy front door slammed shut, and the deadbolt slid into place. Ryan proudly declared he was cutting off my access to everything. What he did not realize was that by locking me out, he had just given me permission to destroy his entire existence. I walked down the quiet suburban sidewalk, the wheels of my suitcase clicking rhythmically against the pavement. The night air was cool and refreshing. My phone buzzed in my hand. I looked down at the bright screen. It was a text message from Ryan. I just transferred every single penny out of our joint checking and savings accounts, it read. "You have exactly $0 to your name. Good luck hiring a lawyer with no money. Do not ever try to come near my house or my daughter again." I stared at the glowing letters, and a genuine, relaxed smile finally broke across my face. Ryan was so blindingly arrogant. He truly believed he was the financial powerhouse of our marriage. For the past 5 years, he had loved playing the role of the highly successful tech visionary while constantly belittling my small software company. He told everyone his startup was revolutionizing the logistics industry. He wore custom-tailored suits, leased an expensive sports car, and threw his weight around at family gatherings like a billionaire. What Ryan did not know was that his precious company had actually been on the verge of complete bankruptcy for the last 2 years. His original investors had realized he was an incompetent leader and started jumping ship early on. His business model was a disaster, and he was burning through cash at an alarming rate. To save our marriage and protect his incredibly fragile ego, I had quietly stepped in. My little basement company, N-Tech, had quietly grown into a massive cybersecurity firm holding highly lucrative private contracts. I had more liquid capital than Ryan's entire extended family combined. Through a blind trust managed by a prestigious third-party wealth management firm, I had secretly become the primary angel investor, keeping Ryan's failing business afloat. I approved the bridge loans that paid his exorbitant salary. I funded the extravagant glass-walled office space he loved to brag about. I literally paid for the roof over his head, and now he had just locked me out of it. I stopped walking under a street lamp and dialed a private secure number. It rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. "Good evening, Natalie," the voice said. "It was David, my senior wealth manager. It is quite late. It is quite sulky. Is everything all right?" "Everything is perfectly fine, David," I replied, watching a moth flutter around the glowing street lamp above me. "Actually, things are clearer than they have been in a very long time. I need you to execute a complete financial freeze on Horizon Logistics." There was a brief, heavy pause on the line. Horizon Logistics was Ryan's company. David handled the blind trust that funneled my money directly into Ryan's corporate accounts. "You mean the monthly capital injection scheduled for tomorrow morning?" David asked, his tone shifting instantly into serious business mode. I mean everything, David, I said, gripping the phone tightly. Cancel the monthly capital injection. Pull the emergency bridge loan we extended last quarter. And trigger the morality and reckless behavior clause in the Series B funding contract immediately. I want every single dollar of N-Tech funding yanked from his operational accounts tonight. Natalie, if I trigger the morality clause tonight, his board of directors will be notified automatically by our legal system, David warned, his voice reflecting the gravity of the move. Horizon Logistics is running completely on fumes. Without our capital tomorrow, they will not be able to make payroll. Vendors will bounce. The company will be entirely insolvent by 9 in the morning. That is exactly the point, David, I said, my voice ice cold. He just tried to frame me for a felony, take my daughter, and lock me out of my own life. Cut the cord, let it burn to the ground. Understood, David said, and I could hear him typing rapidly on his mechanical keyboard. The corporate funds are being frozen right now. The automated breach of contract notices are going out to his board of directors as we speak. Consider it done. Is there anything else you need tonight? Yes, I said. I need you to arrange a penthouse suite at the Four Seasons downtown for the foreseeable future. Use the black corporate card. And please send a private town car to my current location. I am tired of standing on the sidewalk. I hung up the phone and slipped it back into my pocket. Ryan thought he had left me with nothing. He thought taking the $20,000 in our joint checking account was a brilliant tactical killing blow. He was about to find out that he had just bitten the only hand keeping him alive. A sleek black town car glided to a stop beside me 15 minutes later. The professional driver stepped out, opening the rear door and placing my suitcase in the trunk. I climbed into the luxurious leather back seat and poured myself a glass of sparkling water from the mini fridge. As the car drove me away from the neighborhood I had lived in for years, I felt an incredible, overwhelming sense of freedom. I had spent so much time shrinking myself to make Ryan feel big. I had tolerated Patricia's abuse and Brittany's insults just to keep the peace. Now the gloves were completely off. Tomorrow morning, Ryan was going to walk into his expensive leased office building expecting to be the king of the world. Instead, he was going to walk straight into a financial bloodbath. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Horizon Logistics. Ryan stepped out of the private elevator on the 20th floor, adjusting the cuffs of his bespoke navy suit. He had spent the entire commute practicing his tragic expression in the rearview mirror of his leased Porsche. He was ready to play the role of the devoted husband who had just suffered an unimaginable family trauma. He wanted his employees to see him as a resilient visionary, bravely leading the company forward, despite his wife's psychotic breakdown. He stopped by the high-end espresso bar in the lobby to buy a round of artisanal coffees for his executive team. He handed his heavy platinum corporate card to the barista, offering a brave, weary smile. A moment later, the machine let out a sharp beep. Declined? The barista said, looking apologetic. Please try another card. Ryan frowned, snatching the card back. He assumed it was just a minor fraud alert from his bank, since he had drained his personal accounts the night before. He handed the barista a $50 bill and carried the tray of coffees toward the main boardroom. That $50 bill was the last bit of physical cash he had in his designer wallet, but he did not care. He pushed open the heavy glass doors, expecting to find his executive team waiting with sympathetic looks and words of support. Instead, the atmosphere in the room was suffocatingly tense. The chief financial officer, a stern, older man named Greg, was pacing nervously at the head of the long mahogany table. The other 3 board members were staring blankly at their laptops. Nobody looked up to offer condolences. Nobody even acknowledged the expensive coffees Ryan placed on the table. "Good morning, everyone," Ryan said, pitching his voice perfectly to convey quiet strength. I know you all probably heard about the terrible family emergency that happened at my house yesterday. It has been an incredibly difficult 24 hours, but I am here. Horizon Logistics comes first. We have a big week ahead of us, so let us get right into the quarterly projections. Greg stopped pacing and looked at Ryan with an expression of sheer disbelief. Quarterly projections. Greg echoed, his voice cracking slightly. Ryan, there are no quarterly projections. We do not have a quarter. We do not even have a week. The company is completely insolvent as of midnight last night. Ryan froze, his hands still resting on the back of his leather ergonomic chair. What are you talking about? He demanded, letting out a nervous chuckle. We just secured the Series B bridge loan from our primary investor last month. We have millions in operating capital sitting in the main corporate account. I literally just checked the balances on Friday. Not anymore, Greg said, turning his laptop around and sliding it down the polished table toward Ryan. Read the emergency notice. We received an automated legal dispatch at exactly midnight. Our anonymous angel investor has triggered an immediate and total withdrawal of all funds. They pulled the emergency bridge loan and canceled the capital injection scheduled for this morning. Every single dollar of external funding has been yanked. The corporate accounts are completely frozen. Ryan stared at the screen, the words blurring together. This is impossible, he stammered, his face losing all its color. They cannot just pull funding without warning. We have a signed contract. They are legally obligated to provide the scheduled capital. I will call our legal team right now and threaten to sue them for breach of contract. You cannot sue them, Ryan, because you are the one who breached the contract, the lead female board member stated coldly. She stood up, tossing a thick file onto the table. Read subsection 4 paragraph B of the funding agreement, the morality and reckless behavior clause. The investor has the absolute right to terminate all funding immediately and without notice if the CEO engages in behavior that jeopardizes the public standing or operational stability of the company. The notice explicitly states that your actions have triggered this clause. Ryan's heart began to hammer violently against his ribs. My actions, he repeated, his voice rising in high-pitched panic. I have not done anything. My wife is the one who lost her mind. I am the victim here. We do not know what you did. Ryan, Greg interrupted, rubbing his temples in utter defeat. And quite frankly, it does not matter. The money is gone. The corporate credit cards are already declining. I just got off the phone with our payroll vendor. We cannot make payroll tomorrow. When the staff finds out their checks are bouncing, this entire office is going to walk out. Our server hosting bills are past due. By this afternoon, our entire logistical network will go dark. Ryan stumbled backward, his perfectly tailored suit suddenly feeling like a straitjacket. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his hands shaking uncontrollably as he frantically dialed the wealth management firm that handled the anonymous investor's account. The automated voice informed him that the number was no longer in service. He tried dialing his personal bank to check the money he had stolen from me the night before. His personal accounts were locked pending a fraud investigation. The kingdom he had built on lies and stolen money was collapsing around him in real time. The board members packed up their briefcases, avoiding his gaze entirely. They were abandoning ship, leaving him alone in the expansive glass boardroom. Ryan was suddenly an emperor, without a dime, facing millions in corporate debt. And the worst part was, he still had absolutely no idea that his own wife was the one holding the match that had just burned his entire life to the ground. He needed answers, and there was only one person left to blame. Ryan stormed out of the glass boardroom, leaving his shattered executive team behind. He had one singular thought pulsing through his panicked mind. He needed someone to project his absolute terror onto. Since he had locked me out the night before, he assumed I was crying on a park bench or begging a friend for a couch to sleep on. He pulled out his phone and opened the family tracking app he had insisted we install on our devices years ago. He fully expected to see my location pinging at a cheap motel. Instead, the blue dot was hovering over the most expensive piece of real estate in the city, the Four Seasons Hotel downtown. Ryan drove his leased Porsche recklessly through the city traffic, his mind spinning with rage and utter confusion. How could I possibly afford to even walk into the lobby of that building? He had drained our joint accounts. I was supposed to be completely destitute. He handed his keys to the valet with a shaking hand and marched into the opulent marble lobby, demanding my room number from the concierge. Because we were still legally married, the front desk handed him a keycard to the penthouse suite. I was standing by the windows of my $1,500 a night suite holding a cup of tea when the heavy oak door flew open. Ryan barged into the room, his face flushed red with unhinged fury. He stopped dead in his tracks, staring at the luxury surrounding him. The suite was massive, featuring a grand piano, a private dining area, and sweeping panoramic views of the city skyline. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "How are you paying for this, Natalie? Who is paying for this? Did you steal money from my company before you left last night?" I took a slow sip of tea, completely unbothered by his sudden intrusion. "I am paying for it, Ryan," I said calmly. "And considering your company currently has $0 in its operational accounts, I obviously did not steal anything from you." His eyes widened in shock. "How did you know about the accounts?" he snapped, stepping closer to me. "My company is going through a temporary restructuring phase with our angel investor. It has nothing to do with you." He was still lying. Even as his world was collapsing, he could not drop the facade of the successful CEO. He reached into his designer leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents, violently throwing them onto the polished marble coffee table. "Those are divorce papers," he announced, pointing a shaking finger at the stack. "I had my lawyer draft them emergency style this morning. I am taking sole custody of Lily. And since you clearly have some secret stash of money hidden away, I am demanding 50% of everything you own. Every single penny you have hidden from me belongs to me by law." I looked down at the papers and let out a soft, genuine laugh. "You want 50% of my assets, Ryan?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Are you absolutely sure about that?" "I am entitled to it," he yelled, his face twisting into an ugly mask. "I have carried you for years. You are a complete failure. Your little basement startup is a joke. I do not know whose credit card you stole to rent this penthouse, but I am taking half of whatever you have, and if you even think about fighting me on custody, I will destroy you." He took another step forward, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. "My mother is at the police station right now filing her official sworn statement," he threatened, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "She is telling the detectives exactly how you poisoned Brittany. I am going to testify against you too. I will tell the judge how mentally unstable you are. You will go to prison for attempted murder, Natalie. You will be locked in a cage, and you will never see our daughter again." He stood there, chest heaving, waiting for me to collapse into tears. He expected me to fall to my knees and beg him not to call the police. He wanted me to offer him whatever secret savings I had in exchange for my freedom. He was trying to blackmail me, using the very crime his own mother had committed. I slowly placed my teacup on the saucer and walked over to the marble table. I picked up his ridiculous divorce papers and casually tossed them into the nearby trash can. Ryan watched me, his jaw dropping in pure disbelief. He had played every card he thought he had. It was finally time for me to show him the hand I had been holding all along. I walked over to the sleek silver espresso machine sitting on the granite kitchenette counter. I had finished my tea and suddenly craved something stronger. I placed a fresh porcelain cup under the spout and pressed the button, letting the rich aroma of dark roast coffee fill the massive suite. Ryan watched my every movement, his chest heaving with heavy, angry breaths. He was waiting for me to panic. He was waiting for me to cry and beg for a compromise, but my absolute silence was driving him insane. I picked up my coffee and walked over to my leather travel bag resting on the velvet armchair. I unzipped the side compartment and pulled out a crisp blue legal folder. I strolled back to the marble coffee table and dropped the heavy folder right on top of his ridiculous emergency divorce papers. The loud smack of the thick document hitting the table made Ryan flinch. "You should really read what you sign, Ryan," I said, taking a slow sip of my coffee. "I highly recommend starting with page 4. He looked down at the folder and then back up at me, his eyes narrowing in suspicion. "What is this?" he demanded, crossing his arms defensively. "Some fake lease agreement for this hotel. I am not playing games with you, Natalie. I want half of whatever secret accounts you are hiding, and I want it now." "It is not a lease," I replied, pulling out one of the heavy high-back chairs and sitting down, crossing my legs elegantly. It is the post-nuptial agreement you signed exactly 14 months ago. Do you remember that day, Ryan? You came home practically in tears because Horizon Logistics was about to default on its office lease. You begged me to co-sign a massive personal loan using our house as collateral. You swore it was just a temporary cash flow issue, and you needed my signature to save your precious company. Ryan shifted uncomfortably, his arrogant posture faltering for a split second. Yeah, I remember, he snapped. And you co-signed it like a supportive wife should. What does that have to do with anything? We are married. Everything is split 50-50 in this state, regardless of what some old loan document says. I agreed to co-sign the loan on one very specific condition. I continued, my voice calm and steady, cutting through his delusions. I told you my lawyer needed you to sign a standard liability waiver to protect my little basement startup from your corporate debt. You were so desperate for the cash and so incredibly dismissive of my business that you barely even skimmed the pages before scribbling your signature at the bottom. You actually laughed when you signed it, telling me that my imaginary computer company was not worth protecting anyway. He stared at the blue folder, his breathing suddenly turning shallow. I reached out and flipped the folder open to the 4th page, tapping my fingernail against the bold printed text. This is a legally binding, ironclad post-nuptial agreement, Ryan, I explained, watching his eyes scan the dense legal jargon. It clearly states that in the event of a divorce caused by financial fraud or marital misconduct, I retain 100% of my assets. That includes all personal capital, the blind trusts, and the entirety of NTEC's intellectual property. You, on the other hand, walk away with nothing but the massive debts you accrued. You explicitly waived all rights to alimony, spousal support, and any division of my corporate assets. You are bluffing, he yelled, taking a rapid step back as if the document was going to physically attack him. You cannot enforce that. A judge will throw this piece of paper out in a heartbeat. I have not committed any financial fraud, and I certainly have not committed any marital misconduct. You have absolutely no proof of anything. I set my coffee cup down and reached into the back pocket of the blue folder. I pulled out a glossy 8x10 photograph and slid it across the marble surface. It was a crystal-clear, high-resolution image of Ryan kissing his 24-year-old executive assistant outside a luxury boutique hotel downtown, taken just 3 weeks ago. Before he could even process the image, I slid a thick stack of bank statements right next to the photo. And here are the audited financial records from Horizon Logistics, I added smoothly. They show exactly how you have been embezzling company funds to pay for your personal luxury car lease and those expensive weekend getaways with your assistant. That is textbook financial fraud, Ryan. It is a direct violation of your fiduciary duty to your board of directors and a blatant trigger of the misconduct clause in our post-nuptial agreement. Ryan stared at the photograph and the highlighted bank statements. All the color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. His hands began to shake violently at his sides. The realization of his complete and total ruin was crashing down on him. He had marched into this penthouse, expecting to intimidate me and strip me of everything I owned. Instead, he was staring at irrefutable proof that he had signed his entire life away to a woman he thought was completely beneath him. You wanted 50% of my assets, I asked, leaning forward and looking him dead in the eye. You are getting exactly what you bargained for when you signed that paper. $0 and a mountain of corporate debt. Now take your trash off my table and get out of my room before I call hotel security. Ryan stumbled out of the luxurious hotel suite, his legs shaking so badly he could barely stand. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind him, sealing his fate. He rode the velvet-lined elevator down to the lobby in a complete daze. The valet handed him the keys to his leased Porsche, but Ryan could not even bring himself to start the engine right away. He just sat in the driver's seat staring blankly at the leather steering wheel. Everything he thought he knew about his wife, his marriage, and his own brilliant success was an absolute lie. He was not a self-made tech visionary. He was a fraud kept afloat by the very woman he had spent years humiliating. Panic began to claw at his throat. He had no money, no company, and no leverage. His only instinct was to revert to the one person who had always fixed his messes and validated his ego. He jammed the car into gear and sped out of the parking garage, heading straight for the suburbs. 30 minutes later, Ryan burst through the front door of his mother's house. Patricia was sitting in her pristine living room, sipping a glass of iced tea and scrolling through her phone. She looked up, expecting Ryan to bring news of my complete mental breakdown. Instead, she saw her golden boy completely shattered, his expensive suit wrinkled, and his face stained with terrified tears. "Mom, it is over," Ryan choked out, collapsing onto her expensive white sofa. "She has everything." Patricia set her glass down sharply. "What are you talking about?" "Ryan," she demanded, her voice sharp and impatient. "Did the police arrest her yet? Did you file the emergency custody papers?" Ryan shook his head wildly, burying his face in his hands. "She does not care about the papers, Mom. She is the one who funded my company. Natalie is the anonymous angel investor. She froze all the corporate accounts last night. Horizon Logistics is completely bankrupt, and she has an ironclad post-nuptial agreement that leaves me with absolutely nothing. I am ruined." Patricia stared at him, her perfectly drawn eyebrows pulling together in deep confusion. "What do you mean she funded your company?" Patricia asked, standing up. "She is a failed software designer who works in the basement. She does not have any money." "She has millions!" Ryan yelled, his voice cracking with hysteria. "Her company is massive. She has been hiding her wealth from us for years. She has a blind trust holding all the capital, and she knows about my assistant mom. She has pictures of us together and bank statements showing I used company funds for personal expenses. She is going to leave me with millions in debt." The realization hit Patricia like a physical blow. Her arrogant smirk completely vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. For 5 years, she had treated me like a pathetic charity case. She had mocked my clothes, my job, and my background. Now she was finding out that the woman she had tried to destroy was actually a secret millionaire who held her son's entire future in the palm of her hand. But Patricia was not the kind of woman to admit defeat. When she felt cornered, her narcissism simply mutated into a new form of aggression. The shock on her face rapidly hardened into pure, unadulterated rage. "So she has been playing us this whole time," Patricia hissed, pacing across the Persian rug. "She sat in my house, eating my food, pretending to be a nobody, while hoarding a massive fortune. She is even more manipulative and evil than I thought." Patricia stopped pacing, her eyes lighting up with a dangerous new idea. Her original plan had been to lock me up and throw away the key. Now the stakes had completely changed. It was no longer just about custody or getting rid of me. It was about the money. "Get up, Ryan," Patricia commanded, pointing at her son. "Stop crying like a child. If she is hiding millions of dollars, then we are going to take every single penny of it. We just need to change our strategy." She grabbed her phone from the coffee table and dialed a number. Ryan wiped his face, looking up at her in confusion. "Who are you calling?" he asked. "I am calling Jamal," she replied, her voice cold and calculating. "He is a corporate lawyer and his wife is currently lying in a hospital bed because of that psychopath." The line connected. Jamal answered, sounding completely exhausted. "Jamal, listen to me," Patricia said, skipping any pleasantries. "I need you to draft a civil lawsuit against Natalie immediately." "A civil suit?" Jamal asked, his voice thick with confusion. "Patricia, the police are already handling the criminal investigation for the poisoning." "The police are moving too slowly," Patricia snapped. "I want a massive civil lawsuit filed by the end of the day. I want her sued for intentional infliction of emotional distress, attempted murder, and catastrophic medical damages. Ryan just found out she has a massive hidden fortune tucked away in a blind trust. She is a secret millionaire, Jamal. I want you to freeze her personal assets, drain her accounts with endless litigation, and ruin her business reputation. We are going to bleed her dry before she even steps foot in a criminal courtroom." There was a heavy pause on the other end of the line. Jamal was a shark in the courtroom, but even he seemed taken aback by Patricia's sudden aggressive pivot toward my finances. But as he looked through the glass window of the intensive care unit at his unconscious wife, his own anger clouded his professional judgment. I will start drafting the paperwork, Jamal finally said, his voice hardening. She will be served by tomorrow morning. We will take absolutely everything she owns. The very next morning, my phone buzzed on the marble nightstand of my hotel suite. I glanced at the screen and saw a text message from an unknown number. The rigid, formal language gave the sender away immediately. It was Jamal. He demanded that we meet at 10 o'clock sharp at a discreet high-end coffee shop near the financial district. He made it clear that if I did not show up, he would have me served with legal papers at my corporate office in front of my entire staff. I replied with a single word confirming my attendance. I dressed carefully for the meeting. For years, I had worn plain, oversized clothes around Ryan's family to downplay my success and avoid triggering his fragile ego. Today, I put on a tailored charcoal blazer, a silk blouse, and a pair of diamond stud earrings. I looked exactly like the CEO of a multi-million-dollar cybersecurity firm. I arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early and chose a secluded leather booth in the back corner. The cafe was dimly lit and quiet, with soft jazz playing through hidden speakers. It was the perfect environment for a high-stakes legal ambush. I ordered an espresso and waited. At exactly 10 o'clock, Jamal walked through the glass doors. His imposing frame seemed to absorb the light in the room. He was wearing a flawless, custom-tailored suit, but the sharp lines of his clothing could not hide his sheer physical exhaustion. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He had clearly spent the entire night sitting beside his wife in the intensive care unit and drafting legal documents fueled by pure adrenaline and anger. He spotted me in the back booth and marched over. He did not say hello. He did not offer to buy a coffee. He simply slid into the booth across from me and slammed a thick manila envelope onto the wooden table between us. "I am not here to negotiate, Natalie," he said, his deep voice practically vibrating with hostility. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "I am here as Brittany's legal counsel. What you did yesterday was not just a criminal act of violence against my wife. It was a calculated assault. Inside that envelope is a draft of the civil lawsuit I am filing against you at the courthouse at noon today." I looked at the envelope but made no move to open it. "What exactly are you suing me for, Jamal?" I asked, keeping my tone perfectly conversational. He sneered, looking at me with pure disgust. "Intentional infliction of emotional distress, attempted murder, catastrophic medical damages, and severe public defamation," he listed, rattling off the charges with lethal precision. "I know about your little secret wealth, Natalie. Ryan called Patricia, crying last night. I know you have millions hidden in a blind trust. I am filing an emergency injunction to freeze every single one of your personal and corporate assets pending the outcome of this trial. You will not be able to buy a cup of coffee, let alone fund your business. I am going to bleed your accounts dry until you have absolutely nothing left." He sat back, crossing his arms and waiting for the panic to set in. He expected me to pale. He expected me to rip open the envelope and start frantically reading the legal threats. He expected me to beg him to settle out of court. Instead, I took a calm sip of my espresso. "You are a very brilliant lawyer, Jamal," I said gently, placing the porcelain cup back on its saucer. "You have built an incredible reputation in the corporate world. It would be a terrible shame to see you disbarred for submitting a fraudulent lawsuit based entirely on the perjured testimony of your mother-in-law." His eyes flared with anger. "Do not play games with me," he warned, pointing a finger at my face. "Patricia saw you hand Brittany that drink. Ryan saw you acting erratically. I will put both of them on the witness stand under oath. You are going to pay for what you did to my family." I reached into my leather tote bag sitting on the seat next to me. "I am not playing games, Jamal," I replied. "But before you file that lawsuit and destroy your own career, you need to see exactly who you are protecting." I pulled out my sleek iPad Pro and a pair of expensive noise-canceling headphones. I placed them on the table and slowly slid them across the polished wood until they rested right on top of his manila envelope. "Put the headphones on," Jamal, I instructed, my voice dropping the conversational tone and taking on the sharp, absolute authority of a CEO. He stared at the tablet, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What is this?" he demanded. "Some kind of fake apology video? I do not want to hear your excuses." It is not an apology, I said, holding his angry gaze without flinching. It is the truth. Put the headphones on and watch the screen. Unless, of course, you are too afraid to find out that your precious mother-in-law has been playing you for an absolute fool. The challenge in my voice struck a nerve. Jamal clenched his jaw, his pride refusing to back down from a direct insult. He grabbed the headphones and roughly pulled them over his ears. He looked at me one last time with pure contempt. I reached across the table and pressed play on the screen. The screen of the iPad flickered to life. The video started playing in stunning crystal-clear 4K resolution. The camera angle was slightly lower than an adult's eye level, capturing the world from the exact height of a 7-year-old child. It was shaky for a few seconds as the wearer ran across the bright green grass of my backyard. Then the movement stopped. The frame stabilized perfectly, focusing directly on the outdoor bar station on our patio. Jamal leaned closer to the screen, his eyes narrowing. The high-definition footage was undeniably clear. In the center of the frame stood Patricia and Ryan. The ambient audio of the party played through Jamal's noise-canceling headphones, picking up the upbeat pop music and the distant chatter of wealthy guests. But the camera was close enough to the bar to capture the heavy, nervous breathing of my mother-in-law. Watch Ryan closely, I instructed, pointing a finger at the screen. On the video, Ryan abruptly shifted his position. He took a wide stance and turned his broad shoulders deliberately, creating a physical wall between his mother and the rest of the crowded patio. He was actively shielding her from view. Patricia cast a frantic, paranoid glance over Ryan's shoulder to ensure no one was watching. Then she reached into her expensive linen clutch. Jamal stopped breathing. He sat completely frozen in the leather booth, watching as his mother-in-law pulled a small white paper packet from her purse. Her hands were shaking slightly on the video, but her movements were entirely deliberate. She ripped the top of the packet off and dumped a massive dose of white powder directly into the fresh margarita sitting on the granite counter. She grabbed a cocktail straw and stirred the drink aggressively until the powder completely dissolved into the icy liquid. Finally, she tossed the empty wrapper into the silver trash can sitting next to the bar. The most damning part of the video happened a second later. Patricia stepped back and looked up at her son. Ryan slowly turned his head, looking directly at the spiked glass. He locked eyes with his mother and gave her a single distinct and terrifyingly calm nod of approval. The video cut off as Lily turned and ran back toward the bounce house. Jamal slowly reached up and pulled the headphones off his ears. He placed them on this table, his hands trembling with a sudden violent intensity. His dark brown eyes were wide with absolute shock. He looked at the black screen of the iPad and then slowly looked up at me. The aggressive, hostile lawyer who had marched into the coffee shop threatening to destroy my life was completely gone. In his place was a man whose entire understanding of his family had just been shattered into a million irreversible pieces. "What was that?" Jamal asked, his voice barely a hollow whisper. "How did you get that footage?" "It is a prototype micro camera from my company," I explained, calmly sliding the iPad back across the table and slipping it into my tote bag. I had our engineering team build a high-definition lens into a custom resin pendant for Lily. It was supposed to be a fun birthday gift so she could record point-of-view memories of her special day. Instead, my 7-year-old daughter accidentally recorded a felony. Jamal stared at the empty space on the table where the iPad had been. His legal mind was already spinning rapidly, processing the undeniable physical evidence he had just witnessed. There was no ambiguity in that footage. There was no he said, she said defense. It was clear, calculated premeditation. "She lied to me," Jamal muttered, running both hands over his face in sheer disbelief. "Patricia looked me dead in the eye at the hospital and swore she saw you tamper with the drink. She made me draft a civil lawsuit based entirely on a fabricated story. She did worse than that, Jamal," I said, leaning forward and lowering my voice. "She watched her own daughter take that glass from me. She watched Brittany drink a lethal dose of pharmaceutical chemicals, and she said absolutely nothing. She would rather let her own child suffer violent seizures and collapse in public humiliation than admit what she had done and risk going to prison. She let Brittany take the fall just so she could stick to her plan of framing me. And Ryan stood right there and let it happen. And she used you to do her dirty work," I added quietly, letting the truth sink in. "You are the only person in that family with real power, Jamal. You are a brilliant attorney, Patricia and Ryan have always looked down on you, silently judging you because you do not fit their pretentious country club mold. But the second they needed someone to intimidate me, the second they needed an attack dog to file a fraudulent lawsuit, they called you. They treated you like a foolish pawn in their sick game. The reality of my words hit Jamal like a physical blow to the chest. The woman he loved was currently lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to intravenous fluids, fighting for her life because of her own mother. Patricia had manipulated everyone. She had weaponized Jamal's protective instincts, trying to use his brilliant legal mind to destroy the only innocent person in the room. Jamal let out a slow, shaky breath. His jaw clenched so tight the muscles in his face trembled. When he finally looked back up at me, the shock in his eyes had completely vanished. It was replaced by a cold, calculating, and utterly terrifying rage. He leaned back against the leather booth, his broad shoulders suddenly looking like they were preparing for war. "For 5 years," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "Patricia has made sure I knew exactly where I stood in her perfect little world. She smiled at our wedding and whispered to her friends that Brittany was going through a rebellious phase by marrying a black man. She constantly asked if my corporate law degree was some sort of affirmative action handout. I swallowed every single racist, passive-aggressive comment because I loved my wife. I thought Brittany was different. I thought we were building a life away from their toxicity." Jamal picked up the thick manila envelope containing the draft of the civil lawsuit. He looked at it with absolute disgust. "But this," he continued, tapping the envelope against the wooden table, "this proves that none of us are safe. Patricia was willing to let her own daughter drink a lethal concoction just to get to you. And my wife, when she wakes up, will probably defend her. Brittany will believe whatever twisted story her mother feeds her because she is terrified of losing her inheritance." He gripped the envelope with both hands and tore it cleanly in half. He placed the ripped pieces of paper on the table and looked me directly in the eye. "You did not show me this video just to clear your name, Natalie," he stated, his sharp legal instincts taking over. "You could have taken this iPad straight to the police precinct and had Patricia arrested today. But you brought it to me instead. Why?" I smiled, leaning forward and resting my arms on the table. "Because going to the police right now is too easy," I explained. "If I hand this over today, Patricia hires a high-priced defense attorney, claims it was a tragic mistake, and maybe gets a reduced sentence. Ryan plays the ignorant husband and walks away clean. I do not want them to just get caught, Jamal. I want them to walk willingly into a trap of their own making. I want them to stand up in a court of law under oath and commit perjury in front of a judge. I want their absolute destruction on the public record." Jamal slowly nodded, a genuine smile of admiration forming on his face. "You want to let them think they are winning?" he said, understanding the strategy perfectly. "You want them to escalate this to a formal hearing." "Exactly," I replied. "Ryan filed for emergency sole custody of Lily this morning. He is going to try to strip my parental rights using Brittany's hospitalization as his primary weapon. Patricia is going to testify against me. I need a lawyer, Jamal, not just any lawyer. I need someone who knows exactly how they think. I need someone who can stand up in that courtroom and completely dismantle them from the inside out. I need a Trojan horse." Jamal let out a dry, bitter laugh. "You want me to represent you against my own mother-in-law and brother-in-law?" he asked. "The conflict of interest alone would be a massive hurdle. And besides, representing you means burning every single bridge I have left with Brittany's family. It means filing for divorce. It means fighting for custody of my own 3-year-old son. I work for a massive corporate firm, Natalie. They frown on messy public domestic disputes. If I take this on and go nuclear in family court, my partners will likely ask for my resignation." I reached into my tote bag again and pulled out a single sheet of embossed paper. I slid it across the table toward him. "You hate your partners, Jamal," I said smoothly. "You have been talking about opening your own independent law firm for the last 2 years, but you never had the initial capital to take the risk." Jamal picked up the paper. It was a formal letter of intent from N-Tech, my cybersecurity corporation. His eyes scanned the document, widening as he read the numbers. If you represent me, I promised, my voice ringing, with absolute certainty, N-Tech will officially retain your new independent law firm as our exclusive corporate counsel. The retainer fee alone will be enough to lease a premium office space, hire your own staff, and fund your practice for the next 5 years. You get your dream firm. You get full custody of your son away from Patricia's toxic influence. And in exchange, you help me legally execute the family that tried to destroy us both. Jamal stared at the letter for a long time. The ambient jazz music of the coffee shop played softly around us. He looked at the torn pieces of his fraudulent lawsuit sitting on the table, and then looked at the bright future I was offering him. He folded the letter of intent and placed it carefully into his tailored suit pocket. "When is the emergency custody hearing?" he asked, his tone shifting into pure, focused business. "Friday morning," I replied. "Judge Harrison, family court downtown." Jamal reached across the table and extended his hand. "I will draft the notice of appearance this afternoon," he said firmly. "Let them think they have you cornered, Natalie. By the time I am done with them on Friday, Ryan and Patricia will not even know what hit them." I shook his hand, sealing the alliance. The trap was set. I left the coffee shop feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. Jamal was officially on my side, and the legal machinery was moving. I returned to my penthouse suite, ready to prepare for the Friday custody hearing. But Patricia was not the type of woman to wait quietly for a court date. She thrived on public attention, and she knew exactly how to weaponize the court of public opinion. By late afternoon, my phone began to vibrate violently across the marble counter. It was not just one text message or a missed call. It was a continuous, relentless buzzing. My lead public relations director at N-Tech called me, his voice bordering on absolute panic. He told me to open social media immediately and look at the trending topics. I logged into my account and saw my feed exploding with hundreds of notifications, tags, and angry comments from complete strangers. Sitting right at the top of the page was a live video broadcast from Brittany's hospital bed. She had apparently recovered just enough from the heavy sedatives to operate her smartphone. She looked genuinely awful, but she had clearly angled the camera to emphasize the stark fluorescent hospital lights and the clear plastic IV line taped to the back of her hand. Patricia sat right behind her, resting a comforting hand on Brittany's shoulder and looking solemnly into the lens. Brittany was crying hysterically, her voice shaking as she recounted the horrific events of the backyard birthday party. She told hundreds of thousands of viewers that she had been intentionally poisoned by her completely unhinged sister-in-law. She painted a terrifying cinematic picture of me, standing over the drinks, watching her collapse and soil herself with a cruel, sadistic smile on my face. She claimed I was a deeply disturbed woman, insanely jealous of her perfect marriage and her beautiful, affluent life. But she did not stop at personal insults. Patricia had clearly coached her to go straight for the financial jugular. Brittany looked directly into the camera lens, her eyes wide with fake terror, and said my full name. Then she named my company. She told her massive audience that N-Tech, a corporate cybersecurity firm trusted with highly sensitive healthcare data, was run by a literal psychopath who tried to murder her own family. She begged her followers to share the video, to tag major news outlets, and to demand that my corporate clients drop my business contracts immediately. Ryan amplified the smear campaign minutes later. He shared the live video to his own page, adding a lengthy dramatic caption about how he was fighting desperately to protect his innocent 7-year-old daughter from his dangerous psychotic wife. The video was a masterclass in emotional manipulation, and it was working flawlessly. The internet loves a juicy true crime family drama. Within 2 hours, the broadcast had crossed 500,000 views. True crime bloggers were already ripping the audio and analyzing the story. Angry internet mobs were leaving horrific threats in my corporate email inbox. My company website crashed due to the sudden influx of hate traffic. The timing of this public relations nightmare was incredibly dangerous. N-Tech was in the final stages of closing a massive merger with a national hospital network. It was the biggest financial deal of my entire career. The board of directors for the hospital network saw the viral video and panicked. Their lead counsel sent my team an emergency email officially pausing all merger negotiations pending a formal investigation into the criminal allegations. My entire life's work, my reputation, and my company's future were suddenly hanging by a very thin thread. Ryan texted me a screenshot of the paused merger announcement, which had just leaked to a business blog. He followed it with a text message telling me to surrender my assets and give him full legal custody of Lily if I wanted the online harassment to stop. He truly believed they had finally broken me. He thought the immense public pressure would force me to cave and hand over everything just to make the viral nightmare go away. I sat in my quiet, luxury suite and watched Brittany's fake tears loop infinitely on my tablet screen. I did not cry. I did not draft a frantic public apology or try to defend myself in the angry comment section. I simply downloaded the entire high-definition video file, preserving the evidence before they could ever delete it. I forwarded the digital file directly to Jamal with a very short message attached. Add severe corporate defamation and tortious interference to the list of charges. Every single view that video gained was just adding another $1 million to the damages they would owe me on Friday. The next 48 hours felt like standing in the eye of a massive hurricane. Brittany's broadcast continued to gain traction across social media platforms, turning my private family nightmare into public entertainment. Armed with thousands of angry comments and the active police investigation, Ryan did not hesitate to strike his next blow. On Wednesday morning, my legal team received the notification. Ryan had officially filed an ex parte emergency motion in family court. For those unfamiliar with the legal system, an ex parte motion is a drastic measure. It is a request filed by one parent asking a judge to make an immediate ruling without the other parent having a chance to respond. Ryan claimed that Lily was in imminent physical danger if she remained in my custody. He attached the toxicology report, Brittany's tearful video, and an affidavit from Patricia swearing I was a violent psychopath. Because of the severity of the accusations, the judge granted an expedited hearing for Friday morning. Ryan was demanding absolute sole custody, supervised visitations only, and an order permanently removing me from our marital home. He truly believed this legal maneuver would completely destroy my leverage. He thought that if he took my daughter, I would surrender every single dollar of my corporate fortune just to see her again. Across town at her pristine suburban house, Patricia was practically vibrating with absolute glee. Ryan had moved back in with her while he waited for the court to grant him the house. According to our mutual neighbors who quietly texted me updates, Patricia had spent the entire week celebrating her impending victory. She hosted a lavish brunch for her friends, bragging loudly about how she had exposed the gold-digging fraud her son had mistakenly married. She even hired an expensive interior designer to start picking out new paint colors for my living room, fully expecting Ryan to hand her the keys to my house by Friday afternoon. Patricia thought she had orchestrated the perfect crime. She had poisoned her own daughter, framed her wealthy daughter-in-law, and positioned her son to inherit a massive tech fortune. She felt completely untouchable. She was so blinded by her own narcissism and greed that she never even considered the possibility of a counterattack. She assumed Jamal was busy preparing Brittany's civil lawsuit just like she had ordered. She had no idea Jamal was spending 12 hours a day sitting in my hotel suite, drafting a legal ambush that would wipe her entire bloodline off the map. Jamal was a completely different man in those private meetings. The exhaustion had melted away, replaced by the sharp, predatory focus of a brilliant lawyer preparing for the trial of his life. We went over every single detail of our strategy. He combed through Ryan's financial records, highlighting every fraudulent transfer and embezzled company dollar. We reviewed the high-definition footage from Lily's necklace camera until Jamal could recite the exact timestamp of Patricia's crime. We built an ironclad fortress of evidence and locked the doors from the inside. Ryan sent me a dozen text messages leading up to the hearing. Each message was more arrogant than the last. He told me to save myself the embarrassment of showing up to court. He offered a generous settlement, proposing that if I gave him half of my company, transferred the house deed to his name, and walked away quietly, he might let me see Lily on alternating weekends. He told me I had lost the war. I did not reply to a single message. Silence is the most terrifying response you can give to a narcissist. It deprives them of the emotional reaction they crave and leaves them alone with their own escalating anxiety. Friday morning finally arrived. The sky over the city was a clear, brilliant blue. I dressed in a sharp, tailored black suit, pulling my hair into a sleek professional bun. I looked in the mirror of my penthouse suite and saw a woman who was no longer shrinking to fit into someone else's life. I stepped into the waiting town car and directed the driver toward the downtown family courthouse. When we pulled up to the massive stone building, I could see Ryan and Patricia standing near the front steps. They were surrounded by a small group of reporters who had caught wind of the viral video scandal. Patricia was eating up the attention, dabbing her dry eyes with a tissue and playing the heartbroken grandmother. Ryan stood tall in a fresh suit, looking like a brave protector. They looked so confident, so incredibly sure of their imminent victory. They thought they were walking into a simple administrative hearing to claim their prize. They did not realize they were actually stepping onto a legal minefield. I walked past the reporters without acknowledging their shouted questions. The heavy wooden doors of courtroom 4B swung open and I stepped into the chilly air-conditioned room. The space was intimidating with dark mahogany-paneled walls and a massive elevated bench for the judge. I walked calmly down the center aisle and took my seat at the respondent's table. I sat completely alone. My side of the table was empty except for a single yellow notepad and a silver pen. Across the aisle at the petitioner's table, Ryan and Patricia were already getting comfortable. Ryan was wearing his best navy suit, adjusting his silk tie with a look of extreme arrogance. Next to him sat a man in a sharp charcoal suit, who carried himself with the predatory swagger of a very expensive family law attorney. I recognized him from local business magazines. His name was Mr. Harrington, and he was known for being absolutely ruthless in high-stakes custody battles. He charged thousands of dollars an hour, and Ryan had clearly used his last remaining lines of personal credit to retain him. When Ryan saw me sitting alone at the defense table, a wide, smug smile spread across his face. He leaned over and whispered something to Patricia. She looked at my empty table and let out a soft, mocking laugh, covering her mouth with her manicured hand. They genuinely believed I had shown up unrepresented because my corporate accounts were frozen, and I had no money to hire a defense. They thought this hearing was going to be a swift, effortless execution of my parental rights. A sharp knock rang out from the side door. "All rise!" the bailiff called out. Judge Harrison walked into the courtroom. She was a stern, formidable woman with sharp features and a well-known reputation for having zero tolerance for courtroom nonsense. She took her seat at the high bench, adjusted her reading glasses, and looked down at the thick legal docket. "We are here today for an emergency ex parte hearing regarding the custody of a minor child," she announced, her voice echoing firmly in the quiet room. "The petitioner is requesting an immediate transfer of sole legal and physical custody, as well as a temporary restraining order against the respondent. Mr. Harrington, you may proceed with your argument." Mr. Harrington stood up, buttoning his expensive suit jacket. He approached the center podium carrying a thick black binder. "Your Honor," he began, his voice dripping with theatrical gravity, "we are here today to protect a 7-year-old child from a mother who has suffered a severe and violent psychological break. Just 5 days ago, the respondent committed an act of unspeakable, calculated cruelty. He signaled to his paralegal, who rolled a large television monitor into the center of the courtroom. Mr. Harrington pressed a button on a remote, and Brittany's viral Facebook Live broadcast began to play. The sound of Brittany's hysterical sobbing filled the heavy silence of the courtroom. The judge watched the screen closely, observing Brittany's pale face, the sterile hospital bed, and the clear intravenous tubes attached to her arm. The video had been carefully edited to cut out any context, leaving only Brittany's terrified claims that I had smiled maliciously while handing her a poisoned drink. Mr. Harrington paused the video just as Patricia appeared on screen, looking like a devastated mother. He let the dramatic silence hang in the air for a few seconds. He then walked over to the judge's bench and handed the clerk a thick stack of documents. "Those are the certified medical records and the official toxicology report from the intensive care unit, Your Honor," he stated, projecting his voice so the entire gallery could hear. "They detail the exact chemical compound that was maliciously introduced into the victim's beverage, a highly concentrated lethal mixture of Schedule 4 sedatives and industrial-strength laxatives. The victim suffered violent prolonged convulsions and required immediate emergency resuscitation. The hospital bills attached show over $40,000 in life-saving medical procedures. The judge flipped through the medical records, her expression growing noticeably darker with every page. She examined the police report attached to the back of the file. "This is a very serious criminal allegation, Counselor," she noted, looking over her glasses directly at me. "It is more than an allegation, Your Honor," Mr. Harrington countered, turning to point a dramatic accusatory finger straight at me. "It is a calculated attempted murder currently under active investigation by the local police department." The respondent was acting erratically all afternoon. She was insanely jealous of her wealthy, successful sister-in-law. She guarded the bar station and intentionally handed that specific toxic drink to the victim, waiting for her to collapse. Ryan, perfectly on cue, buried his face in his hands and let his shoulders shake, pretending to cry silently. Patricia reached over and rubbed his back, looking up at the judge with a flawless expression of maternal devastation. "Your Honor," Mr. Harrington concluded, gripping the edges of the podium, "my client is a successful, hard-working father who is absolutely terrified for his daughter's safety. A woman who is capable of coldly poisoning a family member at a child's birthday party is clearly unfit to have any parental rights. We respectfully request immediate sole custody and an order barring the respondent from the family home." The courtroom fell completely silent. The trap they built looked absolutely flawless. Ryan lifted his head from his hands and shot me a quick, triumphant glare. He thought he had just won the entire war. He had no idea what was waiting right outside the heavy wooden doors. Judge Harrison took a deep breath and closed the thick black binder on her desk. She adjusted her reading glasses and looked down at me with an expression of profound disappointment. In family court, judges are trained to look for the subtle nuances of domestic disputes, but they are also human. When presented with a tearful mother, a polished lawyer, and terrifying medical records detailing a near-fatal poisoning, their primary instinct is to protect the child at all costs. Mr. Harrington had played the court's emotional strings perfectly, and the judge was completely under his spell. "Ma'am," the judge said, addressing me directly, her voice cold and uncompromising, "you are sitting at the respondent's table without legal representation. This is an ex parte emergency hearing, meaning the court has the authority to make immediate binding decisions regarding the welfare of your daughter. Do you have anything to say in your defense before I issue my ruling?" I stood up slowly, keeping my posture perfectly straight. I smoothed the front of my black suit jacket and looked up at the high bench. "I appreciate the court's concern for my daughter, Your Honor," I said, my voice steady and respectful. "But the evidence presented today by the petitioner is entirely fabricated. The medical records are real, but the narrative surrounding them is a carefully orchestrated lie designed to steal my child and extort my assets." Judge Harrison frowned deeply, clearly insulted by my calm demeanor. "Fabricated," she repeated, shaking her head in disbelief. "I am looking at a toxicology report from a highly respected hospital. I am looking at an active police investigation case number, and I just watched a video of your sister-in-law weeping in an intensive care unit after ingesting a lethal dose of pharmaceutical chemicals at a party you hosted. The court does not consider this a fabrication." Ryan shifted in his chair, leaning closer to his attorney and trying to hide his massive, triumphant smile. Patricia let out a soft, dramatic sigh of relief, pressing her tissue to her chest. They were basking in the glow of the judge's reprimand. The judge folded her hands, resting them on top of the files. "Let me be absolutely clear," she continued, her tone shifting into a severe judicial lecture. "Family court is not a forum for petty jealousy or corporate disputes. My sole responsibility in this room is the safety and well-being of the 7-year-old child caught in the middle of this disaster. Based on the compelling preliminary evidence presented by Mr. Harrington, I have severe concerns about your mental stability and your capacity to parent." She looked around the quiet courtroom, making sure her words carried the full weight of the law. A mother who would intentionally tamper with a beverage at a child's birthday party using powerful sedatives and laxatives represents a clear and present danger to anyone in her vicinity. The fact that you are standing there showing absolutely no remorse only solidifies my decision today. I remained completely silent, letting her finish. In any other situation, standing quietly while a judge berates you would be terrifying. But I knew exactly what was about to happen. Every word Judge Harrison spoke in favor of Ryan was just making the trap tighter. Therefore, the judge announced, picking up her wooden gavel, "I am prepared to grant the petitioner's emergency motion in its entirety. Effective immediately, Ryan will be awarded temporary sole legal and physical custody of the minor child, Lily. You are hereby ordered to vacate the marital residence by 5 o'clock this evening. Furthermore, any contact you have with your daughter will be strictly limited to 2 hours a week and must be overseen by a court-appointed professional supervisor at your own personal expense." Ryan let out a loud, shaky exhale, playing the part of the incredibly relieved father. "Thank you, Your Honor," he whispered loudly enough for the entire room to hear. "Thank you for keeping my little girl safe." Patricia actually reached over and squeezed Ryan's shoulder, her eyes shining with malicious victory. She had done it. She had completely destroyed me. I was about to be homeless, stripped of my child, and painted as a criminal lunatic. Judge Harrison looked down at the paperwork, preparing to sign the binding legal order. She gripped the handle of her gavel, raising it in the air to make the devastating ruling official. The heavy wooden mallet hovered just inches above the sounding block, ready to shatter my life. I did not panic. I simply turned my head slightly, looking back down the long center aisle of the courtroom toward the entrance. I watched the heavy brass handles of the double doors, waiting for the exact moment we had planned. Just as the judge began to bring the gavel down, the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a loud, forceful bang that echoed off the mahogany walls. The judge stopped, her hand freezing in mid-air. Ryan and Patricia twisted around in their chairs, annoyed by the sudden interruption. Mr. Harrington turned completely around, ready to scold whoever was disrupting his perfect victory. Mr. Harrington turned completely around, ready to scold whoever was disrupting his perfect victory. Jamal stood in the doorway, filling the heavy wooden frame with his imposing presence. He was wearing a flawless charcoal gray suit, tailored to absolute perfection, holding a thick leather briefcase in his right hand. His expression was completely unreadable, a mask of cold professional focus. The heavy doors slowly clicked shut behind him, sealing the room. Patricia let out a loud, dramatic sigh of relief, pressing her hand to her chest. She leaned over and whispered loudly to Ryan, thinking she had this completely figured out. "Jamal is here," she said, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. "I told him to draft the civil lawsuit against her. He must have brought the paperwork to serve her right here in front of the judge. How absolutely brilliant." Ryan nodded, his smug grin returning. He sat up straighter, expecting his brother-in-law to walk over and shake his hand. Mr. Harrington lowered his guard, assuming this was just a family member arriving late to show support for his client. They were so blinded by their own arrogance that they could not see the storm walking directly toward them. Jamal began walking down the center aisle. His heavy dress shoes clicked rhythmically against the polished hardwood floor, echoing in the silent courtroom. He walked with the slow, measured pace of an apex predator entering its hunting ground. As he approached the front of the room, Patricia actually reached her hand out toward him, expecting him to stop at the petitioner's table. Jamal did not even look at her. He walked right past Patricia, leaving her hand suspended awkwardly in the empty air. He walked right past Ryan, who blinked in utter confusion. He bypassed the petitioner's table entirely and walked straight over to where I was sitting alone. He placed his heavy leather briefcase on the wooden table next to my yellow notepad. He unlatched it, pulling out a thick stack of formally bound legal documents. He did not look at me, but I could feel the incredible shift in the energy of the room. The absolute isolation I had felt just moments before completely vanished. I had my Trojan horse. Jamal buttoned his suit jacket and stepped confidently up to the center podium, standing right next to a very confused Mr. Harrington. "Your Honor," Jamal said, his deep, resonant voice filling the courtroom with undeniable authority. "My name is Jamal Davis. I am a senior partner in corporate litigation, and I am officially filing my notice of appearance as lead defense counsel for the respondent Natalie. The courtroom experienced a full 3 seconds of absolute paralyzing silence. It was as if all the oxygen had been instantly sucked out of the room. Judge Harrison lowered her gavel, her eyes darting between Jamal, the legal documents he had just placed on the bench, and the panicked faces at the petitioner's table. "Excuse me, counselor," the judge said, her severe tone wavering for the first time. "Are you stating for the record that you are representing the mother in this custody dispute?" "That is correct, Your Honor," Jamal replied smoothly, handing a copy of the filing to the court clerk. "The necessary paperwork has been filed and processed by the clerk of courts this morning. I am fully authorized to speak on behalf of my client." At the petitioner's table, the illusion of victory violently shattered. Patricia let out a loud gasping sound, as if she had just been physically struck. "What is he doing?" she shrieked, forgetting she was in a formal courtroom. "Jamal, what are you doing? You are supposed to be suing her. She poisoned your wife." "Order," Judge Harrison barked, slamming her gavel down once to quiet the gallery. "Ma'am, you will control your outbursts or the bailiff will remove you from this courtroom immediately." Ryan leaped to his feet, his face turning a dark shade of purple. "Your Honor." "This is a sick joke," he yelled, pointing a shaking finger at Jamal. "This man is my brother-in-law. His wife is the woman my psychopath of a wife poisoned. He cannot represent her. This has to be illegal. It is a massive conflict of interest." Mr. Harrington quickly stood up, trying to regain control of his completely derailed hearing. "Your Honor, I strongly object," he stated, his smooth lawyer persona cracking under the sudden chaos. "The petitioner is correct. Mr. Davis is an immediate family member of the victim in the related criminal investigation. He cannot ethically serve as defense counsel for the accused. I ask the court to immediately reject his notice of appearance and proceed with the custody ruling." Jamal did not flinch. He slowly turned his head and looked down at Mr. Harrington with a gaze so intensely intimidating that the high-priced family lawyer actually took a half-step backward. "There is no conflict of interest, Your Honor," Jamal stated, his voice perfectly calm, cutting through the panicked shouting of the opposing table. "I am an independent attorney. The victim in the related criminal investigation is a grown woman capable of retaining her own legal counsel if she chooses to pursue civil action. Furthermore, my client Natalie has formally waived any potential conflicts on the record in the documents I just submitted. As for my personal relationship with the petitioners sitting at that table, I can assure the court that as of yesterday afternoon, I have officially filed for divorce from their daughter and legally severed all ties to their family." Ryan collapsed back into his chair, his mouth hanging open in sheer disbelief. Patricia grabbed the edge of the wooden table, her perfectly manicured fingernails digging into the wood as she struggled to breathe. Jamal had just dropped a nuclear bomb right in the middle of their perfect victory party. Judge Harrison looked down at the documents verifying Jamal's claims. She let out a long breath and set her gavel aside. "Very well, Mr. Davis," she said, her tone shifting from severe lecture to cautious curiosity. "The court accepts your notice of appearance, but you are walking into this hearing at the 11th hour. The petitioner has already presented compelling medical and circumstantial evidence against your client. What exactly do you intend to present that could possibly change the court's mind?" Jamal turned back to face the judge, a cold, calculating smile forming on his lips. He reached back into his leather briefcase and pulled out a sleek, digital tablet. "Your Honor," he said, "I intend to present the absolute, undeniable truth, and I guarantee it will change much more than just your mind today." Jamal swiped his tablet screen, syncing it with the large monitor in the center of the courtroom. The image of Brittany's broadcast vanished. A detailed medical document appeared bearing the official seal of the State Medical Board. Jamal turned to the judge. "Your Honor, Mr. Harrington confidently submitted the hospital toxicology report detailing the lethal mixture of sedatives and laxatives that caused my wife's seizures. but he deliberately left out a crucial piece of the puzzle. They focused on what the drug did to Brittany, but failed to mention what that exact drug would have done to my client. Jamal pulled a red folder from his briefcase, handing it directly to Judge Harrison. "I am submitting my client's certified medical history," Jamal stated, his voice ringing clear. "I direct your attention to page 12, Your Honor. You will see a comprehensive allergy profile conducted by a board-certified immunologist 5 years ago." Judge Harrison opened the folder, her brow furrowing as she scanned the text. "My client has a severe, highly lethal allergy to a specific synthetic binding agent," Jamal explained, pacing slowly. "It is a rare compound used almost exclusively in the exact brand of pharmaceutical laxatives introduced into that margarita. This is not a mild intolerance, Your Honor. This is stage 4 severe anaphylaxis." The courtroom was dead silent. Mr. Harrington frantically flipped through his toxicology report as the reality set in. If Natalie had taken a single sip of that drink, Jamal continued, his voice dropping to a serious register, she would not have simply experienced stomach cramps. Within 60 seconds, her airway would have completely swollen shut. She would have gone into anaphylactic shock followed by cardiac arrest. She would have suffocated to death on her own patio before the paramedics even turned onto her crowded residential street. Judge Harrison looked up from the medical file, her eyes wide with absolute shock. She looked at me, sitting quietly at the defense table, and then slowly turned her gaze toward Ryan and Patricia. Ryan was gripping the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles were completely white. He knew about my allergy. We kept specialized epinephrine auto-injectors in our kitchen cabinets and my purse for years precisely because of this medical condition. He knew exactly how dangerous that specific chemical was to my biological system. "This was not a prank gone wrong, Your Honor." Jamal boomed, his voice shaking the mahogany walls. "And this was certainly not a case of a jealous wife snapping at a birthday party. The powder used in that drink was highly specific. It was calculated. It was a targeted biological weapon designed specifically for the respondent's unique medical vulnerabilities." Mr. Harrington jumped to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "Objection, Your Honor!" he shouted, his face flushed with extreme panic. "This is outrageous speculation. Mr. Davis is attempting to hijack a family court custody hearing and turn it into a homicide investigation with absolutely zero proof. He is suggesting that my clients deliberately selected a specific chemical to trigger a fatal allergic reaction without any evidence that they were even the ones who tampered with the beverage." Judge Harrison raised her hand, silencing the panicked family lawyer. "I will allow it, Counselor," she said, her tone entirely stripped of its previous bias. "The court is suddenly very interested in exactly where Mr. Davis is going with this." Jamal offered a tight, predatory smile. "Thank you, Your Honor," he said, stepping away from the podium and standing directly in front of Ryan's table. "Mr. Harrington makes a perfectly fair and logical point. The certified medical records alone only prove that the drink was highly lethal to my client. They certainly do not prove who poured the deadly powder into the crystal glass. For that, we must carefully look at the physical events of the party." Patricia let out a shaky breath, her eyes darting nervously toward the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom. She was suddenly realizing that she was trapped in a room with a man who possessed a legal mind infinitely sharper than her own. My opposing counsel relied heavily on fabricated eyewitness testimony and a highly edited social media video, Jamal said, gesturing toward the blank television screen. "I prefer hard, undeniable visual facts. The petitioner falsely claims my client guarded the bar station and maliciously poisoned the drink. I have a specific piece of digital evidence that will definitively prove exactly who touched that glass." Jamal tapped the screen of his tablet. He looked directly at Patricia, his dark eyes flashing with absolute righteous fury. "And I strongly suggest that the armed court bailiff physically locks the main doors because absolutely nobody here is going to want to miss this." The bailiff, sensing the gravity of Jamal's tone, actually took a step backward and rested his hand near his utility belt, positioning himself squarely in front of the heavy wooden double doors. Judge Harrison did not reprimand Jamal for his dramatic instruction. Instead, she leaned forward, resting her forearms on the bench, her eyes fixed intently on the large television monitor in the center of the courtroom. Mr. Harrington sat perfectly still, his earlier bluster completely evaporating as he realized he had lost control of the narrative. Jamal pressed play. The high-definition footage filled the screen, capturing the bright, sunny afternoon of the birthday party from the perspective of a 7-year-old child. The clear audio kicked in immediately, broadcasting the cheerful, upbeat pop music and the innocent laughter of happy children playing inside the bright, inflatable bounce house. But the cheerful sounds sharply contrasted with the sinister actions unfolding on the screen. The camera stabilized, pointing directly at the outdoor bar station. There was Ryan standing tall in his casual weekend clothes, holding a plate of food. He looked over his shoulder, scanning the crowd, before deliberately shifting his body to form a physical wall. Then Patricia stepped into the frame. The entire courtroom watched in absolute silence as the wealthy, respectable grandmother reached into her designer clutch. They watched her pull out the small paper packet, rip the top off, and dump a heavy dose of white powder straight into my freshly poured margarita. Gasps echoed from the small gallery of reporters behind us. On the screen, Patricia grabbed a plastic straw and stirred the drink vigorously, ensuring the lethal concoction was perfectly blended into the ice. She casually tossed the wrapper into the trash. Then the most chilling moment of the entire video played out in stunning 4K resolution. Patricia stepped back and made direct eye contact with Ryan. My husband looked down at the spiked drink, then looked at his mother, and gave her a single distinct nod of approval. The video cut to black. The cheerful pop music abruptly stopped, leaving the courtroom drowning in a suffocating silence. Jamal slowly lowered his tablet. He turned to look at the petitioner's table. Ryan was completely frozen, his skin a sickly shade of gray. Patricia was trembling violently, her hands covering her mouth as she stared at the blank monitor. The arrogant smirk she had worn into the building was entirely gone, replaced by the hollow, terrified stare of a woman who knew her life was over. Mr. Harrington slowly pushed his chair back and stood up. He did not object. He did not yell. He looked down at his clients with an expression of sheer professional disgust. He realized in that exact moment that Ryan and Patricia had lied to him. They had handed him a fabricated narrative and used him to unknowingly facilitate a massive criminal cover-up. He reached down, snapped his thick black binder shut, and stepped away from their table, physically distancing himself from the crime they had just committed on screen. "What you just witnessed." "Your Honor," Jamal said, his voice cutting through the heavy silence like a physical blade, "was not an accident. It was a highly calculated, coordinated attack. The petitioner and his mother intentionally introduced a lethal chemical into my client's beverage. They did so with the full knowledge of her severe medical allergy. This was not a misguided attempt to make her look foolish to win a custody battle. This was a targeted biological weapon designed specifically for the respondent's unique medical vulnerabilities." Jamal walked back to the center podium, gripping the wooden edges tightly. "When you knowingly expose an individual to an agent that will trigger stage 4 anaphylactic shock, you cross the line from family law into major felony jurisdiction." The respondent's actions on that video meet the exact statutory definition of attempted murder in the first degree. And because Ryan actively shielded her and approved the action, he is completely culpable as an accessory before the fact. Judge Harrison looked absolutely horrified. She looked at Ryan, who was suddenly sobbing, clutching his head in his hands. "You came into my courtroom," the judge whispered, her voice shaking with unprecedented anger. "You sat at that table and tried to use this court to strip a mother of her child while actively covering up your own attempt to murder her." Jamal did not let the momentum slip. "Your Honor," Jamal stated, "I am formally requesting that you dismiss the petitioner's emergency custody motion with prejudice. Furthermore, I must inform the court that before stepping into this room, I forwarded the unedited video file, the medical allergy profile, and the toxicology report directly to the County District Attorney's Major Crimes Division. I believe they have already made their final legal decision regarding exactly how they intend to proceed with this severe matter." Right on cue, the heavy brass handles of the double doors turned. The armed bailiff who had been standing guard stepped aside, allowing two stern-looking individuals in sharp plain clothes to enter the courtroom. They were followed closely by two uniformed police officers. The lead plainclothes officer, a tall woman with a silver badge clipped to her belt, walked directly past the gallery. The reporters in the back row scrambled for their phones, their gasps echoing loudly in the high-ceilinged room. Judge Harrison stood up from her bench, completely bypassing standard court decorum. She pointed her wooden gavel toward the petitioner's table. "I am officially suspending this emergency custody hearing indefinitely," she announced, her voice ringing with absolute finality. "This court will not be weaponized to facilitate a criminal conspiracy." The detectives did not even look at me as they walked down the center aisle. They did not stop at the defense table. They marched straight to the petitioner's table, where Patricia and Ryan were practically frozen in their chairs. Mr. Harrington, the high-priced family lawyer, smartly took another 3 steps backward, holding his hands up slightly to physically demonstrate to the detectives that he was completely disassociating himself from his clients. "Patricia, stand up," the lead detective ordered, her voice cutting through the tense silence like a whip. Patricia remained glued to her chair, her eyes darting wildly around the room. She looked at Judge Harrison, seeking some kind of judicial mercy. When the judge just glared back at her, Patricia turned to her son, grabbing Ryan's forearm with her trembling, manicured hands. "Ryan, do something," she pleaded, her voice cracking into a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "Tell them it is a mistake. Tell them she made that video up. You know it is fake. Tell them." But Ryan could not speak. He was staring at the uniformed officers standing right behind the detectives, his entire body shaking violently. He knew the video was real. He knew the trap had snapped entirely shut. "Ma'am," the detective said, stepping closer and placing a firm hand on Patricia's shoulder. "I am not going to ask you again. Stand up and place your hands behind your back." Patricia let out a loud, hysterical sob. She finally stood up, her expensive linen outfit wrinkling as her knees buckled slightly. "I am a grandmother," she shrieked, trying to pull her arm away from the detective. "I am an upstanding member of this community. I did not mean to hurt anyone. I was just trying to protect my son from that horrible woman. She is a terrible mother. You cannot do this to me. You are under arrest for felony food tampering and attempted murder in the first degree," the detective stated loudly, completely ignoring Patricia's theatrical wailing. The words slammed into the courtroom walls, carrying the massive weight of a 15-year mandatory minimum state prison sentence. The detective grabbed Patricia's wrists, pulling them roughly behind her back. The sharp metallic click of the steel handcuffs locking around her wrists echoed loudly. It was the exact sound Patricia had spent the entire week hoping to hear directed at me. She had orchestrated this entire elaborate nightmare specifically to watch me get dragged away in chains in front of my husband and daughter. Now she was the one standing in the center of a public courtroom, humiliated, completely exposed, and bound by cold steel. Jamal stood perfectly still beside me, watching the woman who had tormented him with racist microaggressions for 5 years finally face absolute justice. He did not smile. He just watched her with the cold, analytical satisfaction of a lawyer who had just delivered the perfect killing blow. Mom, Ryan choked out, tears streaming down his face as the officers began to physically guide Patricia away from the table. "Mom, I am so sorry. I do not know what to do." "You call my lawyer, Ryan," Patricia screamed over her shoulder as the officers pushed her toward the center aisle. "Call the bank. Use the house money. Get me out of here right now." But Ryan just stood there looking absolutely pathetic. He could not call a lawyer because he had no money to pay one. He could not use the house money because the house belonged to my trust fund. His entire fraudulent life had been meticulously stripped away. He was watching his mother get dragged out of the courtroom to face a massive prison sentence, and there was absolutely nothing he could do to stop it. The reporters in the back row were furiously typing on their phones, documenting every single second of the dramatic arrest. Patricia, who cared more about her public image and country club status than anything else in the world, was being paraded right past them in handcuffs, her mascara running down her face in thick black streaks. As Patricia was shoved through the heavy wooden doors and out into the public hallway, her hysterical screams slowly faded into the distance, leaving behind a heavy, vibrating silence in the courtroom. Judge Harrison slowly sat back down in her leather chair, letting out a long, exhausted sigh. She looked at the empty chair where the arrogant grandmother had been sitting just moments before. Then the lead detective, who had remained inside the courtroom, slowly turned her attention back to the petitioner's table. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a second pair of steel handcuffs. The nightmare for the family was not quite over yet. The architect of the poison had just been removed, but the willing accomplice was still standing right in front of us. Ryan wiped his nose with the back of his hand, completely unaware that the detective's eyes were now locked squarely on him. Ryan wiped his nose with the back of his hand, completely unaware that the detective's eyes were now locked squarely on him. The lead detective took a slow step toward the table. "Mr. Ryan," she said, her voice echoing loudly, "you are also under arrest for conspiracy to commit felony food tampering and accessory to attempted murder in the first degree. Please step out." Ryan froze. His eyes darted toward the heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom. The reality of his complete destruction finally hit him. He did not surrender gracefully. He panicked. Ryan shoved his chair backward so violently it crashed to the floor, and he bolted. He sprinted down the center aisle of the courtroom, his expensive dress shoes slipping slightly on the polished hardwood. He honestly thought he could outrun the consequences of his actions. But he did not even make it halfway to the exit. The armed court bailiff stepped directly into his path. Ryan tried to dodge him, but the bailiff lunged forward, wrapping his thick arms around Ryan's waist and tackling him hard to the ground. The heavy thud of his body hitting the floor echoed loudly. Two strong, uniformed police officers immediately rushed over, dropping their knees onto his back and pinning his arms. "Get off me!" Ryan screamed, his voice cracking with sheer terror as the officers wrenched his wrists behind his back. "I did not do anything. It was my mother. It was all her idea. She made me do it." He was instantly selling out the woman who had just been dragged away in handcuffs for him. The sharp click of the steel cuffs locking around his wrists sounded like a final punctuation mark to his pathetic life. The officers hauled him to his feet, holding him firmly by the arms. His expensive navy suit was rumpled and covered in dust from the floor. His tie was askew, and his face was smeared with sweat and terrified tears. He looked nothing like the arrogant CEO who had swaggered into the building an hour ago. As the officers marched Ryan down the aisle toward the heavy wooden doors, a fragile figure slowly stood up from the very last row of the gallery. It was Brittany. She had been discharged from the hospital just 2 hours earlier and had quietly slipped into the back of the courtroom to watch my parental rights get terminated. She was still pale and wearing loose clothing, leaning heavily against the wooden bench for support. She watched her brother being dragged out by the police, her mouth hanging open in complete shock. Ryan did not even look at her as he was shoved through the doors. Brittany slowly turned her gaze toward the front of the room, locking eyes with her husband. Jamal stood perfectly still at the defense table. He picked up a fresh, crisp manila envelope from his leather briefcase. He did not look angry or sad. He just looked completely finished. He buttoned his suit jacket and walked slowly up the center aisle toward the woman he had once sworn to spend the rest of his life with. Brittany took a weak step toward him, tears welling up in her eyes. "Jamal," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What is happening? Why are they arresting Ryan and my mother? You were supposed to be suing Natalie for me. You promised you would protect our family." Jamal stopped right in front of her. His expression was completely devoid of any affection. "I am protecting my family, Brittany," he said, his deep voice incredibly cold and steady. "I am protecting my son." He held out the thick manila envelope, pressing it directly into her trembling hands. "You have officially been served," he stated loudly enough for the court clerk to hear. "Those are divorce papers. They are accompanied by an emergency petition granting me full legal and physical custody of our son. I am citing severe criminal endangerment and a profoundly toxic domestic environment." I have already secured a temporary restraining order preventing you from coming within 500 feet of our child or our home. Brittany stared down at the envelope, her hands shaking so violently she almost dropped it. You cannot do this, she sobbed, looking up at him with wide, terrified eyes. I am your wife. I am the victim here. Natalie poisoned me. You saw the video. Jamal let out a short, bitter laugh. I saw the real video, Brittany, he corrected her. The unedited version from the necklace camera. I watched your mother pour that powder into the glass. I watched your own brother cover for her. And I know you watched it too. Your mother told you what she did. Do not ever contact me again. Jamal turned his back on Brittany right after delivering those final, devastating words. He walked out of the courtroom, leaving her completely alone in the gallery. She collapsed onto the wooden bench, sobbing uncontrollably, as the reality of her shattered life finally set in. Her mother was in handcuffs, her brother was in handcuffs, her husband was gone, and her son was safely out of her reach. The toxic empire her family had spent decades building had been completely dismantled in less than an hour. The aftermath of that Friday morning played out beautifully over the next several months. The criminal justice system moved swiftly. Because the high-definition video was entirely undeniable, Patricia was formally charged with attempted murder in the first degree. During her arraignment, her expensive defense attorney practically begged the judge to grant her house arrest, citing her age and her supposed standing in the community. But the judge looked at the sheer calculated malice on that video and immediately denied bail. Patricia was officially classified as a severe danger to the public and a flight risk. She spent the entire trial locked in a cold county jail cell, stripped of her expensive linens and designer perfumes. When the final verdict was read, Patricia was sentenced to 15 years in a maximum security state prison. The woman who cared so deeply about her public image became a permanent resident of the state penal system. Ryan did not fare any better. His pathetic attempt to flee the courtroom added an evading arrest charge to his already massive list of felonies. With Horizon Logistics completely bankrupt and his personal accounts totally frozen, he could not even afford a private attorney. He was forced to use an overworked public defender who quickly advised him to take a plea deal. Ryan pled guilty to accessory to attempted murder and criminal conspiracy. He was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. On top of his criminal sentencing, the family court judge permanently stripped him of all parental rights to Lily. He was legally barred from ever contacting us again. The post-nuptial agreement held up flawlessly in civil court, leaving him penniless and drowning in millions of dollars of corporate debt. He walked into prison with absolutely nothing to his name. Brittany tried to fight Jamal for custody, but her efforts were completely useless. Jamal presented the court with the full extent of her family's criminal activities and easily won full legal and physical custody of their son. Without Jamal's high income or her mother's financial support, Brittany was forced to move into a tiny studio apartment and get a minimum wage job. She spent her days entirely cut off from the wealthy social circles she used to dominate. Jamal, on the other hand, flourished. True to my word, N-Tech officially retained him as our exclusive corporate counsel. With the massive influx of capital from our retainer, Jamal opened his own luxurious independent law firm right in the heart of the financial district. His new office featured floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a stark contrast to the stifling corporate firm he had left behind. He was finally his own boss, free from the toxic racism and manipulation of his former in-laws. He quickly became one of the most sought-after litigators in the entire state. As for me, the viral scandal that Ryan and Patricia tried to use to destroy my company disappeared the exact moment the police released the official arrest records and the unedited necklace camera footage. The internet mob that had attacked me suddenly turned their absolute fury onto Patricia and Ryan. The National Hospital Network realized they were dealing with a CEO who could outsmart a coordinated criminal conspiracy without breaking a sweat. They immediately resumed the merger negotiations, and we closed the deal a month later, tripling the overall valuation of N-Tech. 6 months after that chaotic birthday party, I walked out of the glass doors of my massive corporate office building. The afternoon sun caught the reflection of the NTech logo gleaming proudly on the side of the skyscraper. I was wearing a tailored white suit, holding a sleek leather briefcase in one hand. My other hand was firmly holding onto my daughter, Lily. She looked up at me with a bright, happy smile, completely unaware of the darkness we had escaped. A polished black town car was waiting for us at the curb. The driver opened the rear door, and I helped Lily climb inside before taking my seat next to her. As the car pulled away from the curb, merging smoothly into the busy city traffic, I looked out the tinted window. I was completely free. I was wealthy beyond measure. And most importantly, I was entirely untouchable. Have you ever had to stand your ground and outsmart toxic family members who tried to tear you down? Let me know your story in the comments below. If you enjoyed this journey of justice and revenge, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories. Remember that your peace is worth protecting at all costs. Thank you for watching. The story of Natalie and her treacherous in-laws is a brilliant masterclass in handling extreme manipulation. The most profound lesson we can extract from her harrowing ordeal is the unmatched power of emotional control, calculated patience, and silence. When confronted with blatant disrespect, betrayal, or malice, our natural human instinct is to immediately react. We want to yell fiercely, defend ourselves, and frantically prove our innocence to anyone who will listen. Ryan and Patricia banked on this exact predictable reaction. They desperately needed Natalie to unravel, to scream, and to physically look like the unstable, hysterical woman they painted her to be. Instead, Natalie chose the most terrifying response possible for a narcissist's absolute, unshakable silence. By refusing to engage in their theatrical drama at the hospital and by strategically withholding her evidence, until the stakes were at their absolute highest, she allowed her abusers to construct their own prison. She understood a fundamental truth about toxic individuals. They are almost always their own worst enemies. When you deliberately deny them the emotional reaction they feed on, they become arrogant, reckless, and dangerously overconfident. They inevitably overplay their hand. Natalie did not have to stoop to their level of deceit or launch a messy public defense on social media. She simply gathered irrefutable facts, aligned herself with the right allies, and waited for the perfect moment in a court of law to let reality crush their delusions. Her ultimate victory was not just about securing her wealth or achieving revenge. It was about the profound inner strength it takes to remain perfectly still while a chaotic storm rages around you. If you are currently navigating a toxic relationship or family dynamic, remember to guard your emotional reactions, protect your peace, and share this story with someone who needs a reminder of their own quiet strength today.